school. So I'd be glad to know what you think about the future direction of the healthcare sector in the United States and in some Asian countries like China. Thank you.
Well, of course, China's spending a tiny percentage of GDP on healthcare, and we're spending a high percentage. In an aging, affluent civilization, where GDP rises at 2 or 3% per year per capita, I don't think it matters at all if we spend 20% of GDP on healthcare. I don't think it matters that much if 20% of the healthcare is no damn good that we're buying. You know, like Botox for women for whom intervention is hopeless. and so healthcare is a whole different can of worms, but I don't think it's our main problem at all. And I think it is quite natural in our particular civilization to have a fair amount spent on healthcare. If you live to be as old as I am, I'm surrounded by people where their joints hurt so much the pain is unendurable. They're like the Tin Woodman. One hip, one knee. You know, I got a big infection, 30 days in the hospital. This is expensive. But if that's the way the civilization wants to spend the money, I don't consider it a crazy choice. And so we do have a crazy system for healthcare, and there are perverse incentives. There's many a hospital in this country where the doctors are fishing the people out of nursing homes and bringing them into the hospital so they can walk by the bed and bill the government $45 a day. And if we got 10 patients in the hospital, that's $450. And the fact that they're using up resources, which could be improved by the services, aren't being able to get. In my hospital, I have a little list, and so does the hospital. And those jerks are on their way out, and they should be. And so there's a lot of abuse in healthcare, and one of the ways you fix it is so the people who have the power, they exercise it to prevent the abuse. A lot of places you have to live in a hospital. Just nobody really wants to criticize anybody. That's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake. In our leading academic hospitals, I'm sure this isn't happening in Michigan, but I have a friend whose daughter is head of infectious diseases in some medical school hospital, great hospital. And of course the doctors there are fishing the people out of nursing homes and bringing them in so they can walk by the beds and bill. And they're bringing in these terrible infections. And that takes a lot of treatment and a lot of walks by the bed and so on and so on. And of course the parents of this particular doctor recognize that she's sort of risking her life going through medical school because of the abuse of the system by some of the doctors in the hospital where nobody's stopping the abuse. You know, it's like Burke said, for evil to triumph in the world, all that is necessary is the good men do nothing. But all over America, some people are intervening to stop some of these abuses. And you have to identify them, you have to rationalize, you have to be willing to take the ill will. I have a friend, this is another wonderful story on human nature, chief of the medical staff, Southern California Hospital, and a bunch of non-board certified anesthesiologists who came out of, I forget the sub-branch of medicine, but it's not chiropractic, but anyway, they got control of the anesthesia department of the hospital. And he could see that they created 3 totally unnecessary deaths and covered up every single one. And he knew it was just going to ruin his life. So he got rid of them all. He changed the whole system. He ruined families. He ruined incomes. He cleaned house. And he told me the story 20 years later, and I said, what happened? And he said, to this day, none of the people I cleaned out and none of their friends has ever spoken to me. He was willing to take all that ill will to do the Lord's work and do it right. And you can say, why did he wait for the 3rd death? Well, maybe he thought he needed that much horror to accomplish the fix. But all over America, there are stories like that. That's a good story about human nature. That's a story about wisdom and virtue triumphing. And of course, they don't always win, even though bullfight the bull sometimes wins.
I'd like to give one more chance if there's anybody up top who wanted to ask a question because I realize I haven't looked up there all that often. Is there anyone upstairs who wants a question? If not, I do see some hands up down here. All right, you guys please. How about right back here in the back?
Hi, I'm a second-year student at the law school, so thanks for the lights. And I'd like to follow up a question by Tuel sitting over there, was posed earlier. I've also sometimes felt, why did I go to law school? Why didn't I study science? Had that liberal arts regret. But in a more positive sense, since we're still young and optimistic, I think we have questions about what useful role we can play as well. And so I'm wondering, the legal profession as a whole, specifically directed to kind of our group of soon-to-be new attorneys, any ideas for how to change the legal profession for the better, to avoid crises like the recent one, or just to make it a better system? Well,
the legal profession has always been a way out for people who know they don't want to run through the problem sets of science for 6 years, or who don't like the sight of blood. And so, welcome to the club. It's one to know one. And it's always been a profession that allows a certain amount of flexibility. You can start in the legal profession, you can go in a lot of different kinds of activity within it, and you can leave the legal profession and go into something else. And that's what's going to happen to your class too. The legal profession has been bifurcated in America in a very peculiar way now. The ordinary little lawyer in a small town makes $60,000 a year in divorces and collections and minor wills and so forth. And it's a pretty demanding, difficult way to make a living. And the lawyers in the really big, powerful firms who are willing to work 70 or 80 hours a week for 9 years, and once they're taken and rise to being partners, and then when you get to be a partner, you get to keep doing it. That's your reward. You get to keep doing it. And those people make a lot of money. Are there abuses in a culture that gets that money mad about billing hours? Of course there are. I see bankruptcy cases that remind me of a bunch of hyenas going at a carcass on the plains of Africa. It doesn't look to me like a learned profession at all. It looks to me like hyenas at work. And so there's lots wrong with the legal profession. But there's lots right with it. And there's enormous opportunities within it to live a very constructive life and to make a good living in a reputable fashion. And to have various options to leave if that's what you desire to do. But of course there are abuses. I do not see a lot of abuses in the judiciary. We have an amazingly clean judiciary in America, and it's a blessing for us all. And every judge I ever knew behaved better on the bench than he did before. And they were usually pretty good people before. And so I think our legal system is really a pretty reputable system. I do think when you get into the part of the legal profession that's most closely intertwined with Wall Street, that you did get excesses and that were unpleasant. And, Enron did not lack for enabling attorneys. And nor will the future Enron lack for enabling attorneys. And but that's always been true too. But net, I think it's a very interesting career. I started it myself. I was born into it. My father and grandfather were both in it. My grandfather was the only federal judge in the city for 37 years. And boy, was that an efficient system. He was the only judge. And people knew what Judge Munger would put up with and what he wouldn't. Just all kinds of things were not even presented to the court because they knew the answer already. And they didn't want to make points for being a horse's ass in front of Judge Munger because he's going to be there next year too. So, and now in Los Angeles, you spin a wheel. And if you're lucky, if you have a wrong case, you'll get some nutcase who sympathizes with you. And like in Nebraska, you had no such chance. If you want to go to the federal court, it was Judge Munger. You were in the wrong world. So I like that system, and I always like the systems where really good people get a lot of power and exercise it well. I like it when one guy makes all the orders for maintenance and domestic relation cases. He gets very good at it, and the lawyers know what they can't get by with. It's very efficient. I hate a world where everybody's just spending all these hours and hoping to God they get an ignorant judge or an ignorant jury. I think the idea of trying these big patent cases before juries is obscene. It's a dishonor to the civilization, and it's not a legitimate human activity. Basically, you don't want a system where people form shop hoping to get an ignorant decider. You want a system that's different. And so you have a lot of things to fix if you get out into the legal profession. And even if you don't fix something, you can have a highly creditable life. Stuff like Abe Lincoln was a lawyer, John Adams was a lawyer. There's a lot of good models. How many cases Abe Lincoln had personally handled writing the pleadings? 5,000. He was an active practicing lawyer.
Charlie, how would your career have been different if you went to business school instead of law school?
Well, we don't get to live life on alternate career paths at the same time. And obviously, if I drifted into my present line of work at a younger age, I'd have more money now. But so what? You know, I always say, they'll say when I die, how much did Charlie leave? And the answer will be, I believe he left it all. In the end, piling it up is not such a big deal when you have to part with it in the end. And so, I do not regret. Generally, I don't regret. It's like envy and resentment and a lot of other things. It's to me, generally, I don't have a lot of regrets. I could have done it differently, or I had a failed marriage, or I don't second guess the past. I try and learn from the past and make decisions for the future, but I don't gnash my teeth. I expect that any human being is going to make a lot of dumb decisions. And I've certainly made a lot of dumb decisions in my life, but not as many as most people.
We have time for one more question. How about right back here in the back?
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm a dual master student between the Business School and School of Natural Resources, and I have a question regarding rationality and behavior. You talked a lot about it, and also how systems are set up to encourage with perverse incentives. And if you could design a system, how would you take into consideration human nature so that it enables rationality?
Well, I'm glad you saved that easy question for the last. Plato failed at this question, you know. I mean, why can't some man well along in his 87th year describe a perfect civilization? It's a very interesting problem that our founders coped with, and just how democratic you wanted the system. My favorite political system in terms of being adapted to its particular circumstances successfully is Singapore. I think Singapore is the single most successful governmental system that exists in the world. They've taken a small swamp from nope to a very creditable place. They're doing the Lord's work in a number of very important ways. I'm sorry they're bringing in derivatives trading. Even heaven makes mistakes. But that doesn't mean I want Singapore tomorrow in the United States. But I think Singapore's habit of stepping hard on things that will grow like cancer is the correct way to govern. And in America, we tend to wait till they're unfixable, and then we want to fix them. How well are you going to? If you want to take a problem that's solvable and wait till it's unfixable, you can argue that you're so damn foolish that you deserve the problem. And we have a system that is pretty irresponsible in many ways. And I think our central cities get to be the hardest ones to govern on average. And I think that's very awkward. And finally, they reach a tipping point where you get this: the better people leave. And then I don't think you can solve the problem in any normal way, certainly not for a civilization as large as previously existed there. Or if you solve it, it's 100 years in the future, or 50 years in the future, or something. But no, I don't think it's a pure democracy. I think our system has worked. Well, I could tell a story on myself. I come to the University of Michigan. I take political science. I'm an unusual kid. I don't mean I'm unusual looking or unusual dressing or something, but I unusually think often that I know better than the professor. This is not a social winner. And I take political science from a leftist but lovable political science professor. And everybody teaches the more people that vote, the better the systems will work. And having a contrarian streak, I'm not so damn sure the civilization doesn't work better when a lot of people don't vote. And so I read a paper. It couldn't have been more politically correct. I got an A. The University of Michigan not only does right in the hospital, it handles wise-ass kids pretty well. and so, anyway, I can't. If you want to study, you take Singapore. A terrible malaria problem. It's a swamp. He drains the swamps. He's not kerosene little fish tanks. No. He has a drug problem. He searches the world over for the right solution to the drug problem. He finds it in the United States. Isn't that an interesting thing? Imagine somebody in Singapore reading books and deciding the United States was the answer to Singapore's problem. He copied the military's drug policy. That anybody in Singapore will pee in a bottle instantly on demand, and if they flood, they go immediately to a tough compulsory rehab. Away went the drug problem. Just time after time after time, he made these winning decisions. He wanted the place to be prosperous. He figured out who he wanted to come in, and he made the civilization very user-friendly to what he wanted to attract. And it worked. Then, it's 70% Chinese and 30% Malay. And every Chinese thinks that the Chinese are superior to the Malays. And he thinks that's terribly counterproductive if anybody should ever say so. So he passes a law. You can't say if you're Chinese in Singapore that you think there's any superiority in the Chinese. I think that's a very sensible law for Singapore to have. But of course, it has some infringement of free speech. But anyway, just time after time after time, he's done this thing. His approach to marriage was interesting. The average very successful man in the Asian culture marries an exceptionally good-looking woman who's somewhat dumber than he is. This is the system. Well, this guy was so smart that he was a second-ranked student in his high school. And the student that was 1/10 of a percentage point higher was female. So he didn't follow the Asian rule of hiring the beautiful woman with the big boobs. He's a little dumber than you are. He married this woman who was 1/10 of a point higher. And who is now the Prime Minister of Singapore? Their son. And this is a very unusually successful man. It's a very unusually successful history. So while I can't answer your question, if you will make a study of the life and work of Lee Kuan Yew, you will find one of the most interesting and instructive political stories written in the history of mankind. This is better than Athens, this is an unbelievable history. And you will learn a lot that will be useful in your own life. So my answer to you is, don't ask Charlie Munger. Study the life and work of Lee Kuan Yew. You're going to be flabbergasted.
All right, on that note, I'd like to, first of all, thank President Coleman for inviting us here and having all of this. Charlie, thank you for your time and answering all these questions. And, of course, everyone here today for staying with us. We really appreciate all of your time, and that's it. Thank you.
I'm here with Charlie Munger, Vice Chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie, great to see you.
Nice to be here.
I want to continue with some of the questions that people were asking you at the annual meeting, and start maybe with China and trade and tariffs. And you said that even Trump can be right on some of this stuff.
Well, yes, when people get mad enough at one politician, they get thinking everything he says and does is wrong, and that's never the case.
What would, go ahead, continue, I'm sorry.
And all I said was that you don't want to be such an absolute purist for free trade. I'm almost a purist, but not quite. But I wouldn't want the entire steel industry of the United States to move offshore. There's some place where you could draw a line without ruining the world.
What should our trade policy be then? I mean, yes, China can be unfair, is unfair, but how should we pursue this?
Well, I have an attitude that's entirely different from our president's. I'm glad that we ran a big trade deficit with China that enabled them to rapidly get out of poverty and obscurity. I welcome the Chinese to the group of advanced nations, which I think we enabled considerably by our willingness to trade with them as they move ever upward in terms of complexity of enterprise. So I like what's happened. I don't regard it as unfair and bad. And I'm not saying that it would be unthinkable to have some tariff somewhere, but basically I'm a free trader, and I'm particularly a free trader in dealing with China, and I like the fact that free trade with China has enabled China to expand so much. And they got out of poverty. They had hundreds of millions of people in rural poverty, and they made huge in the whole history of the world. No big nation has ever advanced faster than China, and this free trade helped them do it, and I like it.
But aren't they unfair to us? Just to follow up on, intellectual property.
I'm sure there are places where somebody in China has some advantage over somebody in the United States that you and I might not like perfectly, but that will always happen. But basically, the Chinese broke the Berkshire Hathaway shoe business in Maine. It disappeared, basically, because their shoes were very good and cheaper. I'm not mad at China over that. And Berkshire has prospered. It's not so good for Maine, but we can't help it. There's no way to make an advanced civilization never hurt anybody as it evolves.
There's a lot of talk about an elephant that Berkshire is on the hunt for, a big acquisition. Could that elephant be in China? And if it was, could you even buy it, given the relationship between the two countries right now?
I don't think it's likely that we'll be buying any great Chinese companies. The Chinese are very proud of their companies. They're proud of what they've accomplished. What I consider quite likely is that we will be invited to buy part of some great Chinese company, and just because they like the good company. And I think that is very likely to happen at some time. And we would welcome it. We own minority positions in a lot of companies. We own a minority position in BYD.
Let me ask you then about BYD and Chinese cars. When will Chinese cars be allowed in the United States? And what's holding it up? Is it bureaucracy?
Well, the auto market is very competitive and very fully occupied. And of course, nobody in the United States wants to lose our last two big domestic suppliers, manufacturers of autos. Well, three if you want to count Ferrari, Chrysler. And so it's hard for somebody new to come into the American market big. And China has such a big market of its own that my guess is they'll stay busy in their own part of the world for a long time.
So that's not a priority for BYD?
Well, BYD's biggest advantage is in the electric cars, where they are so close to the cutting edge of battery technology. And so they'd be crazy not to emphasize the hybrid and the electric cars over the gasoline cars. Not that they'll go out of the gasoline market, but I think they will be biggest in the hybrid and electric cars.
Speaking of electric vehicles, what do you think about Tesla? Is that company going to become a major player?
Well, it's already created more significance than anybody would have predicted. And its founder is bold and brilliant and swings for the fences. And of course, people like that get some remarkable results, and sometimes they get some quick failure. And I haven't the faintest idea how Elon Musk is going to turn out, but he's got a considerable chance of success and a considerable chance of failure. He seems to like it that way.
Have you considered overnight Elon Musk getting into the candy business, as he suggested he might do on Twitter?
I didn't hear that. It sounds like wiseassery. I can't criticize anybody else for wiseassery.
Let's shift gears a little bit, talk about the single-payer healthcare system that you mentioned. And I think you said that when the Democrats control both houses...
And the presidency.
Oh, it would have to be all three. Okay. So, but you really
I think it will happen.
Okay. I mean,
every other advanced Western nation has it. Different types. No, I don't think my prediction is that radical.
So it could happen in 2 years even then.
And practically everybody is disenchanted with the bureaucracy and cost and foolish results in our own culture, our own medical system.
Is that an instance where bureaucracy has just taken over an entire industry?
Bureaucracy plus entrenched interests that were profiting on the existing system in various ways. I come from California. If everybody in the nation had Kaiser Healthcare, as we have it in California, the net quality of medicine in the United States would go way up. And Kaiser has never been able to succeed very much outside of California because the entrenched vested interests stomp on it. because of its success in California. We're talking about a field where the entrenched interests are making a lot of money. They don't want the change. You wouldn't either if your livelihood depended on it. And so, of course, it's very hard to change our system. The reason the Singapore system is so much better than ours is they didn't have a lot of entrenched interests that were that powerful, and they had a brilliant leader. The Singapore system costs about a fifth of what ours costs and serves better.
Is the healthcare endeavor that you're working on with J.P. Morgan, the Berkshire is working on with J.P. Morgan and Amazon, could that be a template or evolve into a single-payer system?
No, I think a single-payer system comes because the government ordains it. So I think all they're trying to do is make the existing system better. You remember that John D. Rockefeller I, by spending $50 million way back decades ago, utterly revolutionized American medical care. He got all the charlatans out of the medical profession by changing all the state laws, and he had all the medical schools imitate Johns Hopkins, which had imitated Germany. And when his $50 million was spent, the whole of American medicine improved enormously. Now, he did that as a public service, and not many people realize how much public service J.D. Rockefeller I created. And so what Berkshire and its partners are trying to do is a little bit like Rockefeller did.
Oh,
none of them would be doing this just to make money. This is a public service activity.
So that was somewhat of an inspiration?
Well, it's for me, I don't know. They may have had three different aspirations, but I've always admired what Rockefeller did. And the man who talked him into it, Simon Fleischner, also created Einstein's Home at the Advanced, that institute in Princeton. But it was a huge, Bill Gates, who's such an interesting man, all he hopes to do is someday do about half as much as Rockefeller did. He knows what an achievement that was. The timing was perfect.
Let me ask you about Wells Fargo. It sounded like you and Warren are standing by your bank at this point. But I wonder, at what point is enough enough? And how do you decide when a company is just, okay, this is not going to turn around, we're going to abandon ship here?
Well, I don't think for a minute that Wells Fargo is in any way rotten to the core. They just had some incentive programs that caused some bad behavior, and then they reacted poorly to trouble when it came. So they made mistakes of judgment. But I think you'll find them that they hate what's happened so much that they'll be less likely to make mistakes in the future, not more likely. I actually think this is good for Wells Fargo on a very long-term basis. It's agony to go through, but they're going to be better for it.
Let me ask you about Ted Weschler and Todd Combs, and you and especially Warren talk them up and say what great managers they are and how smart they are, and I guess the proof will be in the pudding at some point down the road. Do you see eye to eye with their investing philosophy?
Well, I don't even follow a lot of it. Just because one of them buys some security doesn't mean I start studying it in great length. But I know them well. They contribute enormously because they're talking to Warren all the time. And as I said at the meeting, he's way better for it. So am I. We would not have bought that Apple stock if one of the young investors had not steered us that way. So does Warren's conclusion in the end, but it was prompted by one of the young men. They've been enormously constructive, and they help in a whole lot of ways. They both think totally about the shareholder interest. People coming from investment in marketable securities are always thinking about what's good for the shareholders. And there's just a marvelous influence to have two people, smart and young, around Berkshire with that extreme orientation. And they're not just doing pretty well with the money they're investing. They're favorably influencing the investment they're not in charge of. For instance, the Apple investment.
But in other words, does it change the investing philosophy of Berkshire? So if Berkshire and Warren and you were known as value investors, is that not the core discipline of Berkshire Hathaway anymore, or does that not even matter?
You've got to remember that in our way of thinking, all intelligent investment is value investment. Because why would you want to buy something which wasn't worth as much as you were paying for it? And who wouldn't like buying something for less than it's worth? So the only difference, when people talk about value investing, you're always a value investor. Now, there are various ways to look for value investments, just as there are various places to fish. And if the first rule of fishing is to fish where the fish are, the first rule of value investing is to find some place to fish for value investments where there are a lot of them. And, of course, it's gotten hard in the United States to find easy value investments because the world is so competitive. And that accounts for a lot of what you see in Berkshire, where we buy securities like Apple that we wouldn't have bought in the old days when we had more mundane things that were serving us very well. So we're just looking at different places, but we're value investors.
And so
some people, when they say value investor, they mean somebody that emphasizes working capital or something, meaning they should use the fish in that particular place. But I think that's all. I think it's a bad use of the language to think there's a difference between value investing and other good investing. All good investing is value investing, by definition. And so there are just various places to fish for value investments. And of course, as the world gets tougher, you have to fish in places you didn't fish before.
And so the idea with Apple then is that there's value there that's unrecognized by the market.
Different kind of value investing, and one with which we're less familiar. Well, we wouldn't have bought it if we didn't think it was a good investment.
Let me ask you about one of your favorite subjects nowadays. I think maybe it's Bitcoin. And I know you've had some unpleasant things to say about it. But is there anything there to it at all, Charlie? I mean, should we just dismiss the whole thing?
Well, Bitcoin the computer science is behind Bitcoin is a great triumph of the human mind. That's what captivates a lot of these people. They've actually created a product that's hard to create more of, but not impossible. Now, that is very peculiar, but they've managed to do it. So a lot of the computer science people love it just because it's such an extreme achievement of computer science. I, of course, have no interest in that because it's not my subject. And I see an artificial speculative medium that people are buying just because they think they can sell to somebody else at a higher price, even though it inherently has no intrinsic value. And so I regard the whole business as antisocial, stupid, immoral.
Immoral?
Yes,
What's
immoral.
that? Why?
Why would you trade? Suppose you could make a lot of money trading freshly harvested baby brands. Would you do it, or would you say that's immoral? You wouldn't trade them, would you? It's too awful a concept. Well, to me, Bitcoin is almost as bad. It's not having any desirable social purpose. We've got debit cards. This is why we don't have a payment system. We've got WeChat in China. incredibly efficient payment system. China doesn't need Bitcoin. And if you have a WeChat, why would you do it in a medium where the value changes enormously? Nobody's right mind would want a payment system where the very thing you were using went up and down by 20% in a day. No, I regard the thing as a combination of dementia and immorality. And I think the people that are pushing it are a disgrace. There ought to be some things that are beneath you you just don't do. And this is one. We did not need a gold certificate. I mean, a gold substitute like this.
Last year when we talked, Charlie, you mentioned that Donald Trump exhibited a form of sickness, I think is how you characterized it. I think you were characterizing his personality and his behavior. It's been another year since he's been in office, and I wonder how you would assess him
Well,
today.
I mellowed because I consider it counterproductive to hate as much as both parties now hate. And I have disciplined myself. And I now regard all politicians higher than I used to. I did that as a matter of self-preservation. The other thing I did to make me feel better about the current scene is I reread The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And it goes on for a great many hundreds of pages. And that made me feel a lot better about the current political scene. We're way ahead of the Romans at the end.
That's a pretty low bar.
Well, it's very helpful. I suggest you try it. You will feel better about the present world if you look at that one.
And you said you elevated politicians
Yes.
to make yourself feel
It's
explain that.
counterproductive to hate so much. All of us on both sides are getting to hate so much, too much. And I've decided I'm going to back off from that.
How do we resolve it?
We don't have to resolve it. They all pass. Remember the old saying, this too will pass? They all go away. I have a different rule about politicians. They are never so bad, you don't live to want them back. There will come a time when those people who hate Trump will wish that he were back. I don't think I'll live to see it, but I confidently predict it will happen.
That's interesting.
Well, if you look at the whole scan of human history and the people who led it, there are a lot of bad leaders.
Okay. Why don't we leave it at that? Charlie Munger, Vice Chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, thanks very much for taking the time.
All right.
The wild calls.
Charlie was born in Omaha, Nebraska, January 1st, 1924. He graduated from Omaha Central High School in 41, attended the University of Michigan for 1 year, and Caltech for a year, I believe, as well, under the Air Force auspices. He served as a second lieutenant as a meteorologist in the Air Force in World War II. He received a JD degree, magna cum laude, from Harvard Law School without having an undergrad degree. He practiced law in Los Angeles from 1948 to 65, and during that time he helped found an incredibly successful law firm called Munger, Tolson, Olson. Since 65, he's been engaged in a variety of businesses, and after 1975, primarily as an officer and director of Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie's the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway under Warren Buffett, and he's the chairman of the Daily Journal Corporation. The public companies of which he's a director are Berkshire Hathaway, the Daily Journal, and Costco Wholesale Company. Mr. Munger became a trustee of the Good Samaritan Hospital in 79 and served as a chairman since November 1987. He was a trustee and chief financial officer of Planned Parenthood, Los Angeles from 1967 to 1993, and he's the founder and president of the Alfred C. Munger Foundation. He is the author of Poor Charlie's Almanac, which I think is a must-read for anybody who wants to be in business. So please welcome Charlie and Scott.
Thank you, John, for those very kind words and wonderful introduction. First of all, I just want to welcome all of you. One of the luxuries of this job as Dean of Michigan Ross is the opportunity to travel the world and engage with our alumni, our students, our prospective students, our community broadly. The people make the place, and this place is really special because our people are really special. And so I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. Tonight, I've got the privilege and the honor of sharing the stage with Charlie, who needs no introduction for all of you. He's been a true champion and advocate for the University of Michigan for many years. If you were to study at the law school, you would live and study in the Munger residences, which is one of the most innovative in the country, because what it does is it takes students from different disciplines and puts them together in a living, learning environment. And that really amplifies the strength of the University of Michigan, where you have 130 programs, 103 of which are in the top 10. That breadth of excellence is not matched in the country except at one school here on the West Coast. So it's an honor to have you here this evening, and on behalf of the entire university, thank you very, very much for all that you've done. Yes, please. So Charlie, as I was on the fly over this morning, I was thinking about and preparing for our conversation this evening, and as I went through my notes, I realized that we share an admiration for a historical figure in Ben Franklin.
Absolutely.
And Ben once quoted that there are two things that you can do in life. You can write something that's worth reading, or you can do something that's worth writing about. And you've done both of those.
Oh, but not like Franklin.
And so a couple hours ago, I went on Amazon Books and I just typed in Charlie Munger in the search field. And over 100 books have been written about Charlie. And my favorite title was The Tao of Charlie Munger, which is pretty interesting. And so what I thought we would do this evening for our conversation is really just explore your life and many of the moments in your life that have shaped how you think and what you've been able to accomplish. And I'll ask a number of questions, and at some point hopefully we'll have time to open it up and ask some of the questions that you all are interested in as well. So far we're 2 for 2 in Bitcoin, so that gives you a sense of what's on people's minds. But I'd like to go back to your early childhood in Omaha, Nebraska. So you were raised in Omaha. And what are some of the moments in your experience in Omaha that you really find memorable that shape you and who you are today and how you think? Can you talk a little bit about growing up in Omaha?
Oh, yes, I really liked Omaha. It was a size where I knew a lot of the people who mattered and what they did. After I wasn't lost in a great metropolis. And I was very fortunate in my nature of my parents friends. And I was fortunate in the public schools I attended were pretty remarkable by the standards of the time. And, of course, most of my schooling was in the Great Depression. But that means I'm one of the very few people still alive who deeply remembers the Great Depression. And that's been very helpful to me. It was so extreme that people like you have just no idea what the hell it was like. And there was just nobody had any money. The rich people didn't have any money. People would come and beg for a meal at the door in a hobo jungle not very far from my grandfather's house. And I was forbidden to walk through it, which I walked through it all the time. And I was safer in that hobo jungle in the depths of the 30s when people were starving practically than I am walking around my own neighborhood now in Los Angeles at night. The world has changed on that. You'd think the crime would be less, but the crime was pretty low in those days. So anyway, so I had a very unusual bunch of experience to go through civilization in various phases, including the Greatest Recession. Well, I say it's one of the greatest recessions in 600 years in the English-speaking world. It was really something, and it was very interesting to watch, and also to watch it fixed. It was fixed by the accidental Keynesianism of World War II. Very interesting. And Hitler had fixed the Great Depression in Germany by the deliberate Keynesianism, but he wasn't doing it to stimulate the economy. He wanted to get even with all the people he hated, but he borrowed all this money and created all these armaments. And Hitler's Germany by 1939 was the strongest economic power in Europe, and nobody else was close. So, and you wouldn't understand that as well as I do. He hadn't lived through it. You just could see the place gaining traction. More and more and more and more, and pretty soon it was fixed. And of course, that was, in those days there were all kinds of people, most of my family, they believed in hard money based on gold and not much welfare and so on and so on. So I was raised among fairly backward people by modern standards. But they were backward in kind of a self-reliant way that I think was helpful. I never regretted that I wasn't raised in a more liberal establishment. I had a liberal aunt. She was really my mother's cousin, but she was the second lady dean at the University of Chicago. And she'd done her thesis on the conditions in the coal mines. And of course she was a screaming leftist. I would be a screaming leftist if I observed the way the coal miners in yesteryear were treated. You couldn't be a human being with any decency in you without feeling that it was deeply improper to have the misery that great and have it manipulated for the benefit of the mine owners and so forth. But she sent me all these left-wing books, one every Christmas, and I always thought she was a little nuts. Which shows that sometimes a very vivid extreme evidence misleads you on the deeper reality. You've got to be a guard on that, against that all your life. In fact, the whole trick in life is to get so that your own brain doesn't mislead you. And I have found that as a lifelong fun game. And I can't remember a time I wasn't doing it. I was not a prodigy or anything like that, but I was a prodigy in having adult interests. I was interested in what worked and what didn't and why. And I could see that very eminent people that I loved and revered were nuts in some ways, and I would say, well, I certainly like Dr. Davis, but he's a little nutty in one way, and I'm not going to be like that. And so I was very judgmental, and I think that helped me. And it also helped me that I kept changing my judgments as I learned more and more facts came in, and that created lifelong habits that were very, very useful. Another thing that really helped me is, particularly on my father's side of the family, my paternal grandfather was the only federal judge in Lincoln, Nebraska, the capital city of Nebraska. And he'd been there forever, and he stayed there forever after that. I think when he left, he was the longest serving federal judge in the country. And he was a brilliant man, and he'd risen from nothing. He was a child of two impoverished school teachers. And when he was raised in a little town in Nebraska, they'd give him a nickel to go buy the meat, and he'd go to the butcher shop, and he would buy the parts of the animal nobody else would eat. And that's what two school teachers lived on in those days. And the very indignity of it bothered him so much that he just determined to get out of poverty and never go back. And he did. He got ahead like Abe Lincoln, educated himself in lawyers' offices and so on. He had to leave college because he couldn't pay the tuition anymore. But he educated himself, and since he was utterly brilliant, it wasn't all that hard. And he had an attitude that was pretty damn extreme. And I would say his attitude was that you have a moral duty to make yourself as unignorant and as unstupid as you possibly can. And that it was pretty much your highest moral duty. Maybe taking care of your family came first, but in the ranks of moral obligations, quasi-religious, well, yeah, he was conventionally religious, so it may have been a religious duty to him. But he really believed that rationality was a moral duty, and he worked at it, and he scorned people who didn't do it. On the other hand, as a judge, he started with the idea that why would anybody rob a train or whatever, federal crime in those days. And he was pretty hard on people who did it. And I noticed as he got older and older and older, he was willing to call a man a good man on easier terms than he started out with. And I think that was a correct development in my... By the way, when he relaxed a little, he was still pretty tough. But he did relax a little, which I thought was appropriate. But it was influenced by such people. And when the 30s came, one son-in-law was a musician. And of course, he couldn't make a living. So my grandfather didn't have that much money, sent him to pharmacy school, carefully picking a profession that couldn't fail, and found him a bankrupt pharmacy to buy and loan him the money, and my uncle was soon prosperous and remained prosperous the rest of his life. My other uncle had a bank in Stroudsburg, Nebraska, but there were 968 people in Stroudsburg, and there were two national banks. And the capitalization of my uncle's bank was $25,000. And of course, he was a lovely man, but he was an optimist, and a banker should not be an optimist. And when they closed the banks in 1933, the banking examiners came in and they said, you can't reopen. It was the only business he had. Well, Judge Munger had always saved his money, and he had a lot of good first mortgages on homes occupied by teetotaling German butchers and people he carefully pitched. Of course, he never had a default. Houses were in the right neighborhood, the people were sober and hardworking. And so what my grandfather did is take a third of his good mortgages, which was all he had, put them into the bank, and took all the lousy assets out of the bank. So he saved 2 out of 3 of his children. And I thought it was a pretty good thing to do, and very sure the way he did it. And he actually got most of his money back 10 or 15 years later out of the lousy assets of the bank when World War II. And that was a good lesson. On the other side, my grandfather on the other side, his main business had gone broke in 1922 with all the other wholesale dry goods houses. And what he did, his son-in-law, one of them, went broke, and he cut his house in half and moved that family in. And the other family, the guy was an honors graduate of the Harvard School of Architecture, and he was very prosperous in the 20s in Omaha and had a wonderful life. And when the 30s came, the total building permits in Omaha would sometimes be $25,000 a month, and that was for furnace repairs or something. There was just no work, none, zero. So he moved to California, and he lived for several years, and finally he got the county of Los Angeles to hire this great Harvard architect, and he got $108.08 a month after deductions, and they had him do drafting work, but they classified him as a laundryman to save money. And he could actually rent a house for $25 and feed himself and drive an old car. He could live on $109 a month. Amazing how poor everybody was. And what happened to that grandfather is along came the FHA and they were competitive civil service examination. And he was a very brilliant man. Of course, he was first in the exam, and I made him the chief architect of the FHA in Los Angeles, where he spent the rest of his life. But I watched all of his family coping with all this difficulty. And I'll say this, it sounds awful, but they weren't all that unhappy. You can cope pretty well because you get used to it. That's the nice thing about the human condition. I mean, my age, you got a lot of horrible things to get used to. It's just one new indignity all the time. A friend of mine says a good day when you're old is when you wake up in the morning and nothing new hurts. So anyway, that's my experience in Omaha. But that background, all these people were educated and civilized and generous and decent, and a lot of them had good senses of humor. And it was a pretty damn good place to grow up in. And my memory is of being surrounded by a lot of very fine people. And I think the whole thing was privileged. I look at my background as absolutely privileged. I'm proud of being an Omaha boy. I sometimes use the old saying, they got the boy out of Omaha, but they never got Omaha out of the boy. And so all those old-fashioned values, family comes first, be in a position so you can help others when troubles come, prudent, sensible, moral duty to be reasonable, more important than anything else, more important than being rich, more important than being important, an absolute moral duty. Because none of my intelligent relatives suffered terribly because they didn't advance higher.
Now, one of the things I'm fascinated by is, this was in the 20s and 30s, and the level of detail that you recall about their experiences and how that's shaping your experiences now.
Well, I'm trying to give people a flavor of something that nobody else can remember.
Yeah, you're a student of the people that you're experiencing. So you grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. You find yourself in Ann Arbor, Michigan. How does that happen?
Very simple. I wanted to go to Stanford. And my father said to me, Charlie, I was the only son, two sisters. He says, I've got $2 to educate right after you. I don't have unlimited money. He says, I will send you to Stanford if it really means a great deal to you. But I'd rather you pick a university in the Midwest much better than mine, which was the University of Nebraska. And that was obviously going to be Michigan. What was I going to say? Well, screw you, send me to Stanford. Well, I didn't say that. I went to Michigan.
So you come to Michigan.
I have never regretted that at all. At Stanford, people came to Stanford in the 30s with their string of polo ponies. And it was a very upscale fraternity, sorority culture. I used to call it the coeducational Princeton of the West. And people loved it and so forth. But literally, you'd go to Stanford with a string of polo ponies. I should say, I'm bringing back to you, young people, a time you can't remember. Who did you ever know in college that came with a string of polo ponies?
Not very many people.
Now, they'd be in the ROTC, but they had their own string of polo ponies. You could win better if you had your own string.
So you come to Michigan and you study math for a year.
Yes, but I don't get credit for that. When I was young, I could get an A in any mathematics course without doing any work at all. And so I always took math because it meant that I could literally, and everything, problem sets, I just did the math. And so I should not get credit as some budding mathematician. I was choosing what for me was the easiest way to think about what I wanted to do instead of what somebody else wanted me to do.
Well, come to find out, it ended up being a subject that has, I think, paid some dividends.
Hugely.
Yeah.
But this will interest you in this world where people have all these algorithms and computer science and fancy math and so forth. Neither Warren or I have ever used any fancy math in business, and neither did Ben Graham, who taught Warren. Everything I've ever done in business could be done with the simplest algebra and geometry and addition, multiplication, and so forth. I never used calculus for any practical work in my whole damn life. And I was a perfect whiz at it when they taught it to me. And by the way, since I never touched calculus, not one after I was 19 years old, I lost it. The symbols would mystify me. But I think you'll find that if you really know the basic stuff, it's enormously useful, and only a very few people are ever going to need calculus.
So you study math at Michigan, then the war comes calling.
Yeah.
You move to California, and you study meteorology.
Well, that was because I was too dumb to do what I should have done. With my background, I should have gone to the Naval ROTC, because I hated infantry ROTC, which I'd done 4 years of in high school, rising to be second lieutenant, which is a very low rank. And, of course, I was about 5'2". I got my growth late, and so I was not your ideal of a manly soldier in high school.
So when you went to Harvard Law, why law?
Well, my grandfather and father had been lawyers, and I knew I didn't want to do everything else. It's very simple. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want all the blood and misery and so forth, and the repetitive work. I knew I didn't want to go to the bottom of a big organization and crawl my way up. I'm a natural contrarian. That was not going to work for me. And I found that people could tell me when I thought they were idiots, and that is not a way to rise in a big organization. And so I couldn't do that. And so now I'm left with law, and I admired my father and grandfather, and good luck for them. So I naturally drifted into it. I think people are still going to law school for that reason. It's the least bad of options considering their interest and ability. I guess now people go to business school. Some of them move. My day would have gone to law school. And yeah, many of the people in this room I think are going to go to business school the least bad of their options. And all I can say is that that's the way it worked for me, and it'll probably work out for you.
It worked out okay.
It worked out okay. So I had to leave the profession. Well, it was a dumb profession for me.
So that's actually what I want to ask. So you moved to California, you actually start a law firm, and then practice law for some period of time.
I had no alternative.
And then you
I had an army of children almost immediately. I painted myself in quite a corner.
Yeah. So zero choice is pretty powerful.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes, of course.
So you practice law, and then you leave law in the firm that you helped found, and move over to investments.
Well, but that sounds miraculous. In fact, it was rather interesting. I probably got paid about $350,000 in my first 13 years of law practice. Oh, and I had an army of children and no capital to start with. And when I chose this alternative career, I had over $300,000 in liquid instruments. So I had, and that was 10 years of living expenses. So I was not a courageous, venturesome, admirable man. I was a cautious little squirrel, saving up more nuts than I really needed and not going very deep into my pile of nuts. And so it wasn't that courageous, and I kept one foot in the law firm while I tried my capitalist career. But as soon as the capitalist career succeeded, I intended to lift that second foot because I recognized that the potential of law practice, as I saw it then, I didn't anticipate the boom that came to the big firm. I just saw it as being more difficult. And I wanted more independence than I was going to have as a lawyer. I hated sending other people invoices and needing money from richer people. I thought it was undignified. I wanted my own money. Not because I loved ease or social prestige. I wanted the independence.
Well, and when you founded Wheeler Montgomery Company, so that was the investment firm.
Yes.
And
I went and I created 5 real estate projects. I did both side by side for a few years, and in a very few years I had $3 or $4 million.
And for a number of years, you outperformed the market 2x, 3x. And so why did you then leave Wheeler Munger and Company and then move to now what you're doing?
Well, I had $3 or $4 million, which was a lot of money then. And I also knew how to handle that $3 or $4 million very well by that time. And so I knew I didn't need to get fees and overrides from other investors. And I found that when you got into things like the 74, 75 crunch, which was the worst since the 30s, I didn't suffer. I knew everything was going to work out. But the quoted prices of these things really went down to ridiculous levels. And some of my investors I knew were suffering. I needed the money. And of course, I have enough of a fiduciary gene that pained me greatly. And so I said, well, it's like my grandfather once asked me how he felt when my aunt divorced my uncle. And he said, I feel just the way I did when they lanced my carbuncle. And that's the way I had a carbuncle. My fiduciary gene was doing me pain. And I said, well, the hell with that, lanced the carbuncle. I just lived on my own money. No fees, no overrides, no salaries. Just seemed more manly to do, and I knew it would work.
And so at what point did you meet Warren? And
1959.
And so where did Berkshire Hathaway come from in terms of this partnership that you all have now had for decades?
Well, Warren had been taught by Ben Graham to buy things for less than they were worth, no matter how lousy the business was. And you can't imagine a more lousy business than New England textile mills, because textile is congealed electricity. And the electricity rates in New England were about 60% higher than TVA rates. So it was absolute, inevitable, certain liquidation. Now, Warren should have known better than to buy into a totally doomed enterprise. It was so damn cheap, he could buy a big discount from liquidating value. So he bought a big chunk, finally ended up in control of the business. But the business was going to die. So the only way to go forward from there was to bring enough money out of this declining textile business to have more money than he paid to get in and use it to buy something else. Well, that's a very indirect way to proceed, and I would not recommend it to any of you. Just because we did some dumb thing that worked, you don't have to repeat our path. And of course, we eventually learned not to buy these cigar butts when they were cheap and do these painful liquidations, and instead buy better businesses. That's the main secret of Berkshire. The reason that Berkshire has been successful as a big conglomerate, more successful than any other big conglomerate, so far as I know, any other big conglomerate in the world. The reason it's been successful is we try and buy things that aren't going to require much managerial talent at headquarters. Everybody else thinks they've got a lot of managerial talent at headquarters, and that's a lot of hubris. If the business is lousy enough, it gets a wonderful manager. And the business has a lousy reputation, and the manager has a good reputation. It's the reputation of the business that's going to remain intact. You can't fix these really lousy businesses. You can wring the money out, whatever comes in liquidation, and do something else with it. But most lousy businesses can't be fixed.
But at the time, Warren that's what he was doing. And so
yes.
How did you convince him?
I helped him. He bought a windmill company in a little town in Nebraska. Warren didn't know anything about running a windmill company. He bought it because it was cheap. And he said, what do you do? Why can't you fix my windmill company? Who can you get to help me? I said, I've got just the man for you. And so one of my old colleagues from a transformer business who was an accountant, I said, he will fix your windmill company. And Warren was desperate. He just hired him on the spot. And Harry walked in the first day of this little town, this big collection of windmills and so forth. And the whistle blew, and the whole point stopped for 15 minutes. And he said, what the hell is this? And he said, well, it's respect for the town manager has a funeral. He's blow this whistle and stop for 15 minutes. And Harry said, that'll be the last time. And he just approached everything that way. And of course, another thing he did is he cut away all the fat that he didn't need, and then he found there were certain parts where we were the sole supply. And he raised all the price of those parts. You can see what a business genius we are.
So how did you convince Warren to stop buying the bad apples and start buying the good apples?
I think Warren, he gave me credit for that. He was going to learn it anyway. He just made so much money in this other stuff, and he'd been taught it by Ben Graham. It was hard for him to quit when he was just coining money. But he saw the point. And, well, you couldn't scale that business. And it was kind of scroungy and unpleasant, and you're firing people. Who the hell wants to do that? So we just wrung the money out and bought better businesses. And we've been doing it ever since. Coming to business, not as business school graduates, but as people who would own portfolios of securities. We thought like capitalists because we were always in a shareholder mindset. And a lot of people running the businesses think like careerists. And believe me, you've got to think like a careerist to some extent if you're in a career. But it also helps to look at the business strategy problem as though you're an owner. And so my advice to you is you don't want to never get to be a career so much you don't see it from the owner's point of view. That's what General Motors did. They had a bunch of careerists. And an owner would have seen immediately that the situation was hopeless. And they just romped through it with a lot of denial and stupidity and pomposity. And of course, they went bankrupt. The mightiest company in the world went bankrupt. And none of those hotshot executives thought like an owner. They would have seen that it was hopeless.
So Charlie, one of the things I've always been fascinated about
It was hopeless the way they were handling it.
Well, with Berkshire and the way that you all manage both headquarters and businesses that you own, you are putting talent in place who think like shareholders, not careerists. So how do you, when you're buying a business, or bringing talent into an existing business, how do you evaluate talent to see, are they going to think more like a shareholder? As
Private equity frequently buy a business where the founder's going to leave, then they go on our talent to run it. That is a tough way to make a buck, and I don't like it. We generally buy with the talent in place. Now, maybe some guy in the number 2 place and we put him in the number 1 place, but we very seldom. I can't think of any place where we bought something and put somebody in after Harry Bottle. And no, we don't do that. And it's amazing how long that's not what people say. Warren always says we can't teach the new dogs the old tricks.
And what's the implication of not being able to teach the old dogs new tricks, or new tricks to old dogs? When if we look at what's happening in business today, what we see is executives.
We can't teach the old tricks to the young dogs. That's what we found.
And
so we keep the old dog in place.
But that's not the norm, right? I mean, if we look around,
no, it's the norm in life. I mean, our practices may not be the norm, but normally it's very hard to get you got a wise old dog, get a young dog that can match him. That's hard. By definition, he's survived a big culling process. Sure. I mean, he's unique, and he's got a record to prove it. And by the way, everybody thinks you can judge people by an interview. And of course, you know who you like and who you don't like. But Everybody overestimates how much you can tell and predict it by meeting somebody. We all like to think that we have that capacity, but it's a vastly stupid type of overconfidence. The paper record has about 3 times the predictive value of your impression in an interview. And of course, we're buying great paper records. It's so simple.
But it's fascinating to me, if we look around business generally, the movement of people across firms, and there's always new dogs. And you've taken a contrarian position to that and managed Berkshire differently.
Well, it might work. Of course, we're still hiring young dogs into these businesses. But it's amazing how much of the record of Berkshire has come from the old dogs who are in the business when we buy them. You can't believe how good those people have been. There's one huge exception in the new dog department. I almost despise the business of executive search because I find that they really want to sell you the best that's available, even if it's no damn good. And I don't like that. But the best single expense that Berkshire ever had is we paid an executive recruiting firm to find us Ajit Jain to come into our little tiny insurance operation. He didn't have any experience in insurance at all. He was an honors graduate of the main technical institute of India. He was a very smart man. But he came in and created a whole It's the only big business we created from scratch. And Ajit did the whole damn thing. Of course, he talked to Warren every night. And so it was like father and son. Remember, this is a very Confucian company. But that was unbelievable. So we hired an executive recruiter. He brings us in India that had no experience at all in insurance. He talks with an old man every night. And it's now by far the biggest reinsurance business in the world. And it's been a gold mine. There's at least $60 billion in Berkshire of net worth that Ajit has created that we would not have created without him.
Wow.
And the value is way more than $60 billion. There's that much in extra just liquid net worth, but the value of the business is way more than $60 billion.
Wow. So, Charlie, I'm going to turn to a few questions from the audience as we start to wrap up. Probably half my questions here are about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
Well, I can answer those very quickly. I think it's perfectly asinine to even pause to think about them. It's one thing to think that gold has some marvelous store of value because man has no way of inventing more gold or getting it very easily. So it has the advantage of rarity. Believe me, man is capable of somehow creating more Bitcoin. They tell you they're not going to do it. They mean they're not going to do it unless they want to. That's what they mean when they say they're not going to do it. And if they say the rules and they can't do it, don't believe them. When there's enough incentive, bad things will happen. It's bad people, crazy bubble, bad idea, luring people into the concept of easy wealth without much insider work. That's the last thing on earth you should think about. If it worked, it would be bad for you. You could try and do it again. It's totally insane. And by the way, I just laid out a wonderful life lesson for you. Give a whole lot of things a wide berth. They don't exist. Crooks, crazies, egomaniacs, people full of resentment, people full of self-pity, people who feel like victims. There's a whole lot of things that aren't going to work for you. Figure out what they are and then avoid them like the plague. And one of them is Bitcoin. And the worst thing would happen if you won because then you do it again. It's total insanity. And it's so easy to simplify life from just all these things are beneath you. I don't even want to know. People are promoting Bitcoin. I don't want them to know my address.
So, Charlie,
I'm not my kind of people.
Charlie, what I hear you saying is you're not going to be investing in Bitcoin. That's fair?
I think it's fair.
So let me move to a similarly maybe controversial topic. I don't know if you read the news recently, but there's a lot of tax policy conversation going on, both here in California and nationally as well. What's your thought on where this ends up in terms of the tax policy?
I think we will get a tax bill. I think they'll squeak it through and they'll make whatever adjustments they have to get the last few votes. I don't think it's a bit crazy to give this extra $2,000 a year to all those people who make $70,000 a year and have a lot of children. That strikes me as it's good politics and probably good policy. I also do not think it is crazy to reduce the corporate income tax on the C corporation. And if you look at the world, a lot of the places that work best, including Singapore and so forth, have that policy and may even have good macroeconomic consequences. And a lot of the people who are screaming about it and are so sure it won't work, they may not be right. It may actually work pretty well. It causes the capital values of the companies to come up, and there's a wealth effect from the increased market value of all the companies. Everybody recognizes there's an effect, but some people say it's small and some people say it's going to be large. And I'll tell you what they all have in common. None of them know. It is not totally inconceivable that it will work pretty well. And with so much of the world doing well with similar tax policy, and of course, the Democrats go berserk on this subject. But I think they're wrong. It may actually help them. Yeah, so I'm not sure it'll work. It may not, but it's not totally crazy.
Well, it reminds me of a piece of advice that you've offered and given to me, which is people often have a point of view, and the danger in having that point of view is you start to assume with certainty that you're right.
Absolutely, totally crazy.
And I think what your point of view is you need to have a point of view.
Just a minute. Here's a very important subject I've been thinking about all my life. You asked for my opinion. Yes. I don't really know how well it's going to work. I don't think anybody else does either. I think it'll work to some extent, but how much I don't know. Now, is it unfair? Well, the corporations are by and large owned by a bunch of charitable endowments and by a bunch of pension plans, and the whole world is going into a world where they're trying to have the business interests of the company support their huge pension obligations, which get bigger all the time. China is trying to do exactly what the Republicans are. China wants to have the main businesses in China owned more by the pension plans and the stocks to do well. I don't think China's crazy to have that. I don't think the Republicans are crazy either. It could work pretty well. And it's not just some evil thing that people are cooking up. It's a disagreement between people. And both sides who have violent hatreds and contempt for the other side, they're wrong. It's a disagreement on policy that ought to be civilized. When I see Congress on my television set and the degree of hatred they have, utter contempt, I mean, really serious, way more than is usual. It's evil to hate that much. It's a mistake to hate that much. That much hatred will turn. It's always been true. As anger comes in, reason leaves. It's a truism. So do you want to adopt a political point of view where you're angry all the time? If you do, welcome to the house of misery. and pretty low worldly achievement to boot. Yeah. So if that's what you want, you just found out how to do it. Behave like those people you see on television.
Well, the other thing
in both parties, by the way.
Yeah, the other thing that's true, going back to one of your earlier comments, is the difference between a careerist mindset and a service or shareholder mindset, where in politics we have the emergence of a careerist mindset that is shaping how people behave because they're trying to survive.
Not only that, they have groupthink. Just as the Moonies go crazy because they hang around together, so do our politicians. Yeah, and
right.
you want to go crazy? Is that what your ambition in life? You start with some advantage. Just make yourself a violently believing politician on either side. They'll turn your brain into cabbage. You only got one brain. Why would you want to turn it into cabbage?
So Charlie, I've got a question here. What's the new amazing technology that you're most excited about?
Well, I tend to get not to get very excited about. I think that technology changes the world, and that reminds me of a thing. If I ask you what was the worst single mistake in the work of Adam Smith, I know I don't see everybody big eyes lighting up. The biggest mistake in the work of Adam Smith, he was totally right about markets and so on, and the advantages of trade, division of labor, and so forth. What he missed was how much the steady advance of technology would advance wealth and standards of living. He, in the 1700s, was living not too much differently from the way they lived in the Roman Empire, and he just missed it. But there, in fact, had been huge improvements in technology, but he just missed it. He wasn't very technically minded, and it was really stupid. And now I'll ask you a harder question. What was the worst mistake David Ricardo made? I'll bet the dean can't answer this question. I'm not going to ask you to try. I'll tell you the answer. David Ricardo missed. He got the first order consequences of trade perfectly right, and it was not an obvious insight, and it was a great achievement, but he didn't think about the second order consequences. He wasn't mathematical enough to see, and he wasn't mathematical to think what would happen if one country had way higher living standards than another. And he, like Adam Smith, he missed. And the main issue in a place like the United States is if you have an advanced nation and some other nation which is numerous, but the people, if anything, are better on average than yours in terms of their inequality, which I think is roughly true of China, and they're in poverty, they're living in caves, and they're caught in a Malthusian trap, and you've got an advanced economy, and you suddenly go into free trade. What is going to happen is, Ricardo proved it, both sides are going to live better, right? But the people here that are assimilating all great economies of the world in China, they're going to go up way faster. So you go up 2% a year, and they go up 12%. And pretty soon they're the dominant nation in the world, and you aren't. Well, are you really better off? Well, the answer is no, and Ricardo never figured out any of that stuff. And so I'm telling you that so that you can fix your inadequate knowledge of Ricardo. But one of the interesting problems of that is you can't understand Ricardo properly in thinking about the United States vis-a-vis free trade with China without thinking about the tragedy of the commons. Because if we had the only nation in the world, except for China, we could say we won't trade with them, we'll just leave them in their damn agricultural poverty, and we'll just, and we could probably have done that. But the whole rest of the world will trade, they're going to rise anyway. So we don't have any power to hold back the rise of China by not trading with them. So we had to do what we did. And once you do that, now they're going to be a greater power than we are. And the two of us are going to be big enough so we can accomplish pretty nearly anything we both want to do. So we have to be friendly with China. So you can imagine how I like Donald Trump complaining about the Chinese. It's really stupid. It's a compulsory friendship. It's a compulsory friendship. You'd be out of your mind to do anything else. Why wouldn't you want to have an intimate, friendly relationship with the biggest other power in the whole damn world? Yeah. Particularly when they got a bunch of atom bombs. It's just nutty. We have no alternative but to do this. And when that happens, you're going to get a certain amount of misery at the people who are competing with the Chinese as they rise from poverty, with trade and so forth. That was inevitable. It's not the fault of a bunch of evil Republicans who don't love the poor. Yeah. That is just total balderdash. It just happened. And we didn't have all these choices.
So Charlie, in wrapping up, we've got, roughly 250, 300 people in the room tonight, and many of them looking at their futures, their careers, with many decades ahead of them.
I wish I had many decades ahead. I'd trade some large numbers if I could just buy some life expectancy.
As you look back on your life experience, what's the most important piece of advice that you would offer everyone in the room tonight as they look forward into their futures?
Well, there are a few obvious ones. They're all ancient. Ben Franklin, marriage is like the most important decision you have, not your business career. And it'll do more for you, good or bad, than anything else. And Ben Franklin had the best advice ever given on marriage. He says, keep your eyes wide open before marriage and half shut thereafter. It's amazing how if you just get up every morning and keep plugging and have some discipline and keep learning, and it's amazing how it works out okay. And I don't think it's wise to have an ambition to be president of the United States or a billionaire or something like that, because the odds are too much against you. Much better to aim low. I did not intend to get rich. I wanted to get independent. They just overshot. And by the way, while you're clapping, some of the overshooting was accidental. There's a big, you can be very deserving and very intelligent and very disciplined, but there's also a factor of luck that comes into this thing. And the people who get the outcomes that seem extraordinary, they're the people who have discipline and intelligence and good virtue, plus a hell of a lot of luck. Why wouldn't the world work like that? So you shouldn't give credit for the unusual. A lot of the people, a friend of mine said about a colleague of his in his fraternity, he says, old George was a duck sitting on a pond and they raised the level of the pond. There are a lot of people that just luck into the right place and rise, and there are a lot of very eminent people who have many advantages, and they've got one little flaw or one bit of bad luck, and they're mired in misery all their lives. But that makes it interesting to have all this variation.
Well, Charlie, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. Your wisdom. I often say, as an educational institution, we not only can provide people with knowledge, but the most important thing we can do is give them wisdom and judgment. And your comments, I know for me, and I expect for everyone in this room tonight, have added to our wisdom and our judgment, and also inspiring at the same time. Thank you very much.
So let's start off and talk about the economy a little bit. And obviously, we've been on a good long run here.
A very long run.
And yeah, does that surprise you? And what would be the signs that you would look for to see that things were winding down?
Well, I look at a lot of figures just in connection with our businesses. I like to get numbers. so I'm getting reports in weekly in some businesses. But that doesn't tell me what the economy's going to do 6 months from now or 3 months from now. It tells me what's going on now with our businesses. And it really doesn't make any difference in what I do today in terms of buying stocks or buying businesses, what those numbers tell me. They're interesting, but they're not guides to me. If we buy business, we're going to hold it forever. So we're going to have good years, bad years, in between years, maybe a disastrous year some year. And we care a lot about the price. We do not care about the next 12 months.
But are you surprised at how long this economy has been expanding?
I've been surprised by all kinds of things in the last 10 years about the economy. I mean, I don't think there was any economist I've ever read that talked about negative interest rates for long periods of time. I mean, if you go back and read Keynes or you read Samuelson, you read any of them, they do not get into a negative rate environment. I think now there's still 11 trillion that's of government debt around the world that's at a negative rate. So we've never seen it before. And we've never seen, at least the conventional wisdom, a sustained period of long and growing deficits while the economy is getting better, extremely low interest rates, and really very little inflation. So something different is happening, but something different happens all the time. So, and that's one reason economic predictions just don't enter into our decisions. Charlie Munger, my partner, and I, in 54 years now, we've never made a decision based on an economic prediction. We make business predictions about what individual businesses will do over time, and we compare that to what we have to pay for. But we have never said yes to something because we thought the economy was going to do well in the next year or 2 years, and we never said no to anything because we were right in the middle of a panic, even if the price was right.
Or so you don't pay much attention to business.
Well, I pay none in the sense of as a guideline to doing anything. It's entertainment. I mean, it's like going to a variety show or something like that. But and I just don't know of any economist that actually has bought businesses successfully or done well in stocks. Paul Samuelson did. You may know he was a big shareholder of Berkshire, but it's they make guesses, and there's so many variables. I mean, in the hard sciences, you know that if an apple falls from a tree, that it isn't going to change over the centuries because of anything or political developments or 400 other variables that go in. But when you get into economics, there's so many variables, and the truth is, you've got to expect good times and bad times in business. And if you were to buy an auto dealership and you're wherever you live locally or a McDonald's franchise or anything like that, you wouldn't try and time the purchase. You try and make the right purchase at the right price, and you want to be sure you got a good business. But you wouldn't say I'm going to buy it because growth this year is 33% instead of 2.8% or something of the sort.
Fair enough. You have over $100 billion in cash.
Berkshire does that.
Berkshire has over $100 billion in cash, and you say that you always want this company to be a fortress. So how much cash should an ordinary investor have on a percentage basis?
It depends on a personal situation. I mean, if you're working in something where you're living off your paycheck from week to week, you want to have a little cash around, and you certainly don't want a credit card that's maxed out or anything like that. But if your house is paid off, if you don't have big living expenses, you got a portfolio of decent diversified businesses, you don't really need any cash.
So you can be more cash-free than Berkshire is.
Yeah, I've got responsibility. We've got insurance claims. We could have hurricanes that would happen. All kinds of things where we might have to pay out billions of dollars. And I've got over 1 million people that own shares that are coming run the place so we get through periods like that. But if I were retired, I had say $1 million portfolio of stocks that was paying me $30,000 a year in dividends or something of the sort, and my children had grown, the house was paid off and everything. I wouldn't worry too much about having a lot of cash around.
Let's talk a little bit about Apple. Everyone always wants to talk about Apple. That's kind of its stock, its company. You have a $45 billion stake, more or less. It was up, now it's down. You're still in the money. How closely do you follow the company? People are concerned they haven't really introduced any new products.
Well, if you have to closely follow a company, you shouldn't own it.
Really?
No, I mean, if you buy a business, if you buy a farm, you go up and look, every couple of weeks to see how far the corn is up, and you worry too much about whether somebody says this is going to be a year of low prices because exports are being affected or anything like that. You buy a farm and you hold it for. I've got one farm that I bought in the 1980s, and my son runs it, but I've been there once. I mean, it doesn't grow faster if I go and stare at it. I can't cheer for it. More effort, or something like that. And I know there's going to be some years when prices are going to be good, and some when prices aren't going to be good. I know there's years when yields will be better than others. But about the farm, and if it just doesn't, I don't care about economic predictions on anything of the sort. I do care that over the years it's well tended to in terms of rotating crops, and I hope yields get better, which they generally have. In fact, that farm 100 years ago would have probably produced 30 bushels, maybe 35 bushels of corn per acre. Now in a good year, it'd be 200. I mean, we've really made progress in this country. That's one reason commodity prices go back a couple hundred years. They've moved so little is because we've just gotten better and better. Whether it's cotton or whether it's corn or soybeans or all kinds of things. And you and I have benefited from that.
And so Apple's kind of like a farm.
Well, it's a long-term investment. And if you own the best auto dealership in town, the best brand, and had something good running, you would drop by every day and say, how many people come in today, or I think interest rates are going up a little, maybe it'll slow down our sales. No, you buy it knowing there's 365 days a year, and you're going to own it for 20 years, so that's 7,300 days, and things are going to be different from day to day. And you shouldn't buy it if the day-to-day stuff is important.
Let's switch over to talk about buybacks, which is another hot topic these days. And you did a fair amount. If you look in the annual report, you can see that between December 13th and 24th, it looks like you guys bought back about $233 million worth of Berkshire, which was right near that particular stock market bottom. How did you know that? What was going through your mind?
If I knew it, I'd have bought a lot more than 200. No, that's not a big purchase for us, actually. And we will buy Berkshire when we have lots of excess cash. All the needs of the business are taken care of. We spent $14 billion on property, plant, and equipment last year, way more than depreciation. So we take care of the needs of the business. Then we have excess cash. And if we find investment, we'd love to do is find other businesses to buy. But if I think the stock, and my partner Charlie Munger thinks the stock is selling below intrinsic business value, we will buy in stock.
So it obviously wasn't that point.
Well, we thought so, yeah. But what's really intriguing is when it goes down a lot. I mean, when you're buying dollar bills for 60 or 70 cents, which periodically you get a chance to do in stocks, then assuming you've got the cash, you don't want to ever get so that some surprise to really take you out. So if we've got excess cash, we'll buy it as fast as we can. Yeah, exactly. But it's if you and I own a McDonald's franchise together, it's worth $1 million, and you 50% of it, you come to me and say I'll sell out for $400,000. I'll buy you out. You say 600. Yeah, well, you should be. You should be, yeah. If you want $600, I'll just say, come back tomorrow.
So to continue about buybacks, Senator Schumer and Sanders want government to weigh in to legislate when companies can do buybacks. And then also there's been a report recently that executive inside the around buybacks.
Well, you'll have some people that misbehave in respect to any activity. I mean, it really wouldn't have much to do with buybacks. I think buybacks, to the degree to which they've been part of nefarious activity, I've observed them for a lot of years, and very close to zero. That just may be the term of opportunities. But that article did not, I didn't follow the conclusion on it. I mean, you're distributing money to shareholders. Essentially, you can do it by dividends, and presumably American business should distribute money to its owners occasionally. And we do it through buybacks. We've done some, and we don't do it through dividends. And most companies do it through having a dividend policy. And then if they have money beyond the needs of the business, then I think if their stock is underpriced, then it makes nothing but sense.
So the government companies
Well, they do restrict you a little in terms of if you're some general rule of the SEC if you're having some kind of, this isn't quite the right word, but manipulative activity or anything kind of stuff. But no, I don't think the government should provide the dividend policy. I don't even think they direct your capital investments. They can make it enticing to make capital investments, which they do with renewable energy, for example. I mean, the government has interest in fostering certain developments in the country over time, and they do, special oil police, which 50 years ago and so on. That was more politics than it was governmental policy, but certainly renewables are a prime example of that. But the idea of directing whether you are entitled to return cash to shareholders and the manner in which you do it, I don't think really makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's hard to win with just a very vote. But I admire enormously. I wish we had that. I'd like to refer.
So two questions. Is it business executive and what characteristics do you look for in a president?
Well, I think a business executive can be elected. I don't think that because they're a business executive that you give them extra points. And number one, I want a president that wakes up every morning and realizes that the greatest threat to a country which has got all kinds of things going for it, weapons of mass destruction. And we live in a world where people, organizations, and occasionally countries could have people that have to fight by the law for people want to be for the country as well. And that you now have capabilities, which I was recently, biological, but I think you have to have cyber. You have some people being someplace that crazy reasons, just like what happened with anthrax back. Who knows what motivates somebody that starts sending anthrax out in letters. And you have somebody that thinks it'd be great to send a false alarm to the Russians and to the U.S. that the other side was launching or something of the sort. It's a very, very dangerous world. It's a wonderful world, but it has dangers now. It started in August of 1945, and when Einstein said, this changes everything in the world, what men think. So I want a president that has that same goal. All of these other things are important, but protecting the country and reducing the chance of successful use of weapons of mass destruction is the number one job. I think most of the presidents are totally Republican. I really think that they do realize when they get lost in the events of every day as they go on. And then beyond that, I want a president that has two objectives to the economy. One is to make sure that this marvelous goose we have laying more golden eggs. And then I want a president that also feels that if GDP is $60,000 per capita in the United States, that nobody should get left behind. We've got a market system that works marvelously in terms of goods and services. Better ones, year after year, done it all through my life. It also has as they said, we have a system that the people who don't fit the market system in terms of their talent, and they can perfectly live in other businesses at home. They don't have, they just don't have that kind of talent. Like I don't have athletic talent. So if I had to live in an athletic universe, you could train me 8 hours a day and I could read diligently. What good? I just get out there and pummel the ball or whatever would happen. So we have to take care of the people that the market system doesn't take care of while it's spewing out huge riches for the people who do fit well. And that can be done. Well, don't tell me what I want to hear. So I want to hear what they tell people who disagree with them on the subject. I always like to ask a candidate, they usually finesse me somewhere. I say, what do you for that the majority of your followers are against? I know you really believe in that. That's really the test, but I'm not sure that it's up under. Great answer. If I really want to get, and that's why Bernie Sanders was so successful. I mean, 90% of people voted for Bernie Sanders had probably not heard of him 2 years earlier, but they felt that they knew exactly what he would do. I mean, they felt he was authentic. And if you asked him, what he was for that most people might be against, he would tell you.
A few questions about crash lines. I know you say you learn from your mistakes. Do you think that's
I'd rather learn from other people's mistakes, actually.
Was that a mistake?
Well, we'll find out over time, but we did take too much for craft. We didn't take too much behind. So when we started out, it was originally a non-public partnership with them. And we did take too much, in my view, for craft. And there's not much you can do about it. You take too much. And secondly, there's always been a struggle between the retailer and brands. I mean, if I've got a terribly weak brand and I want to get into Walmart, I'm not going to do it. I mean, that's over all kinds of crazy concessions and all that. And I want to be in Walmart if I have some sort of super package. But the negotiation is way different if you got something essential, which is not essential. 10 years ago, Costco had to get rid of Coca-Cola. Costco's got ripped royally among customers, and their own Kirkland brand is a $39 billion brand now, and it moved from category to category, and it started in 1992. So they know brands, but in the end, they put Coca-Cola back in. If it had been Royal Crown Cola, they would have had to put it back in. So there's always that struggle between the brands. I mean, and there always will be. But the retailers net has been moving in a direction, particularly, I think, because of the Amazon revolution. Walmart, yeah. I mean, but it's been accentuated, I think. We have a new retailing environment now. I mean, it might go from night to day, but it moves somewhat. And brands that people spend billions of dollars developing, sponsoring TV shows, sponsoring radio shows. Campbell Soup was always on there with Jack Benny or something, when I was a kid. And it was big. And it built brands. And people obviously like the product too. but people are more willing to change, and it's harder. It's a somewhat different world. It is night and day. I mean, you are very unlikely to keep changing brands every day. But it really surprised me that Gillette lost position. I mean, men don't like to experiment much. I was a better experiment, but you know, if kids, when you were a kid, Gillette Cavalcade Sports was your pal and watched the Rose Bowl and World Series and all that sort of thing. You didn't shave with Gillette the rest of your life, and you still do to a great degree. But it's not exactly the same as it was even 5 years ago or so when you broke out. I always admired Jeff. I met him 20 years ago or so. And I thought he was something special, but I didn't realize you could go from books to I mean, he had a vision and executed in an incredible way. Something that would not have, you know, but there's a lot of games like this. I would have missed Microsoft even if I got Middle Bill earlier, but those just aren't my games. I don't worry about the things that I guess that are outside my circle of competence of evaluating. I have missed things that were within my circle, and that's a terrible mistake. Those are my biggest mistakes you haven't seen. But I don't, it's not a mistake because I missed Netscape or something like that at all. I would say that maybe 5% of the companies or 10% of the companies at most are within an area of my circle of competence. There's something I should be able to understand. No, newspapers went. You're the only one in town. In other words, some competitive situation. But it was survival of the fattest. Whichever paper was the fattest won. Because it had the most ads in it, and ads are news to people. I mean, they want to know what supermarkets having to bargain on Coke or Pepsi this weekend. It upsets the people in the newsroom to talk that way, but the ads were the most important editorial content from the standpoint of the reader. Overall, in anything, I mean, if you were looking for a job, you had one place to basically look, and that was the classified section. If you were looking for an apartment to rent, and those pages were just dozens and dozens of pages. That's disappeared. I mean, the essential things that are essential news is what you don't know that you want to know. And you know what happened in national sports. The moment it happens, and you go watch video of it and so on, and go to ESPN and see what's going on. You know what's happening in politics. You know what's happening in stock market. I used to look at the stock market papers the next morning before I delivered the papers. I checked them out. The world has changed hugely, and it did it gradually. It went from monopoly to franchise to competitive to Coke. No, they're disappearing. They're going to disappear. New York Times won't, Washington Post won't disappear. Well, if you're running about 5%, I think they lose good. You know, that's a new world. And nobody, neither Republicans or Democrats are concerned about it. And we're not having a lot of inflation. That wasn't supposed to happen. You know, but it's happening. And that's why I say you don't want to get hung up on trying to make economic analysis because nobody's any good at it. You don't get rich doing that. If you look at, you mentioned that Forbes list, you get on the list, the number of people that have done that by economic analysis, I think are just about both done. Well, there's one more. I think the earned income tax credit is the best way to put money in the pockets of people who don't fit well into the market system, but that are perfectly decent citizens and that have made a good bit of the success that I've had in this history as possible. It wouldn't happen without the America we have. And if you go back 200 years, and we're all working on, 80% of us are working on farms. The person that's the best at that, working on that farm, whatever it may be, is worth maybe twice the one that's the worst. I mean, that's the difference between super talent and no talent in the farm economy, picking cotton or whatever it may be. Now, if you're the best middleweight fighter in the world, you make it $20 or $30 million. And if you are just a good citizen, raise nice kids, help in the neighborhood and everything else, but you don't have market-related skills, you'd be good on that farm still. And you would be earning something comparable to most of the people around you. But you don't have something now that as it gets more and more specialized, and it's going to continue to get more specialized. You want two things for that person. You want to have a decent life. They live in a country with 60,000 GDP per person. You want them to have a decent life, and they can. I also think you want them to have a decent accomplishment. You want them to have a job that's not handicapped. You want them to have a job. But the minimum wage would be one way to say, well, we'll make sure that they have enough money in their pocket. But that's got a lot of effects in disturbing the market. They just need more cash. They don't need a higher wage. They need more cash in their pocket. And the government, at relatively low cost, can provide a decent living for anybody that's working 40 hours a week and has a couple of children. And we've gone in that direction. And it's sort of bipartisan. I mean, both Republicans and Democrats. I think it would be better not to have one annual payment. You know, they get it monthly. And I think there's various things you can do. But you want them to feel part of the system. And you want to have them get as more and more of these golden eggs are laid. You want them to get a little more.
Big taxes on wealthy people, free college for all, and those are...
You want more money in the pockets of everybody's willing to work or is unable to work. And we can do it. A rich family can do that. You know, I had 6 or 7 kids and had some business I wanted to pass on. We picked the most able person in the market. That's the market system to do that. Just to make sure that all 7 of the families can do that. You get more than one. You might get more than one that kept producing the golden eggs. You would. But you wouldn't just say to the lowest end, who might be the best kid of all in most respects. He's one to share with everybody. There's all kinds of things. And you wouldn't say to that emperor that, too bad, but that's just the way the market system works, you know. Go have your spouse get a job and browsing someplace.
Why don't you update about the healthcare initiative, which now becoming a name?
Yeah,
is that your idea?
No, I didn't worry about a name. I think it brought on as a no-name operation for 10 years. No, that is, we've got a wonderful partnership in the sense that it's large and has reasonable market muscle with more than 1 million employees. We've got 3 CEOs who can make things get done in organizations so make it one way. They would very good pattern. I mean, we try to do this with many big companies. We have legal weighing in and public relations weighing in. We don't have any of that stuff. They may have them in certain areas, but the Jimmy isn't the word. doing that sort of thing. And so we've got a unity of commitment and an ability to execute on commitment. The only problem is we've got a $3.4 trillion industry, which is the country federal government every year, that basically feels pretty good about the system. As we went around talking to people, to find a leader for the group, for example, everybody says, the system, it turns out very good medicine, but you can't go from 5% of GDP to 18, without really making it less competitive on other things in the world. So everybody thought the system needed some adjustment, just not they're part of the system, and that's very human. I do the same thing, I'm sure, if I was in the same place. So there's an enormous resistance to change, while a similar acknowledgement that change will be needed. And of course, if the private sector doesn't supply that over a period of time, people will say, we give up, we got to turn this over to government, which is not Todd really does all the work in our budget. If it works, give Todd 100% of the credit for the Berkshire standpoint. I talked to him once or twice. I'll tell you one interesting story about him. I think it was 2010. I've got a partner, Charlie Munger, who's 95 now, but we both read the New Yorker, but we don't talk about it. And one day I'm talking to Charlie, and I say, "There's this terrific article by a fellow I've never heard of before, probably not pronounce his name." And I said, Charlie said, since I sent him a check for $20,000, I read that article, it's the best article I've read in a long time, so I just thought, you don't get paid that much for being a writer in the New Yorker, so he just sent him off a check. So two guys 1,500 miles apart, both regard that as one of the most interesting, informative articles, and similarly we followed it subsequently. But it wasn't my day. Well, it's true that if you read 3,000 or 4,000 words by somebody on an important subject, and they really give you some insights or some factual background or something that you haven't seen in years and years of reading about it, I mean, they should make it impression. Other people make it impression if they're right. No, the plan is to support a very, very, very good thinker on this subject who is a practicing physician and who commands the respect of the medical community to, in effect, figure out some way so that we can deliver even better care and have people feel better about their care too. I mean, they have perceive that they're receiving better care at the time and stop the march upward cost levels. If you take 18 cents out of every dollar of output in the United States and say it's going into health, that leaves 82 cents. And other countries are doing it for 10 or 11 cents. When if you go back to 1970, all of us were doing it for around 5 cents. So we started from a fairly simple point compared to major industrial countries, and it just keeps going up. And last year, a corporate tax cut was put in for something that was 2% of GDP, roughly. And people said, can't be competitive, we got this 2% cost versus the rest of the world, and there's something that basically corporations get very low. And it goes to 18, and I say it is a take one with the economy. We've got such a wonderful economy, we can do some very expensive things, but that doesn't mean we should. If you have a rich family, you still want to be as efficient as you can. That's not what all this family do. And it just makes sense. We've got this incredible economic issue, but we shouldn't be spending 18% when other countries are doing something pretty comparable in terms of doctors per capita, hospital beds per capita, all that. The very top stuff in medicine, I think, is very much concentrated in this country, and that's great. I want us to be a leader, but I just don't. I think we're paying 7 extra points of GDP. That's 1.4 trillion a year. I mean, they're trying, and Congress generally. I mean, probably the average congressman, they regard it as a problem, and they see specific instances, of drug prices or something like that, but. It's a big problem to change. I mean, the problem intersects in so many ways, and that's why we've got Kawani heading it. We've got three organizations back here. We're not trying to do it to make money. I mean, it's not a goal that we have for some businesses that we make money off of. So it's from everybody. But his game plan is not something we're going to lay out because it's in his head to some degree. I mean, obviously, he's selected him by hearing and reading and so on what he's done. But he'll work. We will conduct certain experiments, or he will, and try out a community where a lot of reporting. There's various ways to experiment. Yeah.
You talked about disparity in value between states and those that you're looking to buy position stuff rather than buy the why does that exist?
Well, generally speaking, when companies are sold, they sell at a premium. They sell at a premium because the buyer thinks they can do all kinds of wonderful things with the present management is doing. I've often said that on the Fortune 500, maybe 250 companies should buy the other 250, and they just totally shift every year because they think they can run it better than the next guy, which is what you're saying when you buy it in its entirety. I don't really think other people are running when we buy it, so it's hard for me to get to a premium, and the premiums have gotten more dramatic, and the leverage available has gotten pretty generous, and that causes people to buy it. People love to buy it. They can't pay for it. Basically, it's somebody else to put up the money. And we don't calculate leverage into any of our purchases. In other words, we don't say, if we buy this thing for $10 billion, we can borrow $7 billion against it, because we're really using up Berkshire general credit. I mean, I could apply 70% leverage to any one of our companies, never. But the truth is, it's the general credit of Berkshire that's doing that, so it'd be crazy to just because I want to buy something, say, well, I'm buying this for 30% leverage, so therefore I can pay this kind of sort of price. But when the CEO, well, you've got a huge bundle of money that's committed to buying something. They're going to pay the fee, tick every day to buy it. Now, they can get paid whether they buy it or not. Think or not to some extent, which is kind of an interesting business approach, but they do. But they also, let's just say there's $1 trillion out there. I don't know the figure. But beyond that, they probably $2 trillion of leverage. They probably use 2/3 of it if they could purchase something close to that. So you've got like $3 trillion of maybe purchasing power using these assumptions, which I know aren't correct, but they're in the general ballpark. Well, $3 trillion, you're only $30 trillion in the U.S. company, roughly. And you take Amazon and Apple and Berkshire, they aren't for sale, so you got trillions that aren't. So the demand supply is really tilted. And of course, 100% against it. that whenever you've got somebody who gets paid for the upside and locks up the money for 10 years, they've got every incentive to keep doing it. 20 years ago, I had a fellow call me whose name you would know, and he said, "Well, I don't know anything about the insurance business, and the insurance company offered it." And he said, "Tell me what I should be looking at." I went through a little bit, but I said, "You never learn that much about the insurance business. Why phone call with me? And why are you looking at it?" And he said, "Well, we got to get the money invested in the next 3 months. We have to give it back, and that's his equation, And once he buys that company, he's got a fee built in for 5 years or whatever it may be, and he's got some of the upside. He's like upside, but if it doesn't work out, he still makes a lot. He gets very, very rich by what he's saying. So it's tough to compete with that. No, I don't think, but probably 50 years ago I lived in a few markets quotation, but I mean a lot. And if you're 88 years old, I mean, I don't remember something. I don't remember what happened yesterday. If you're the old something, you've got a lot of interesting quotations in your head.
I was looking at another topic completely. I was looking at the New York Times stock, and boy, it was like $3 in 2009. It's $30 a day, and noticing Carlos Slim, I think, did pretty well.
Very well.
Were you interested in buying New York Times? Did they approach you back then in 2009?
It's been reported, and it's in this book that just came out by the former editor. There's just a little reference to it. Yeah, Jill's book, and it's just touched on there. But they were in trouble. A lot of companies were in trouble then. Now they've hit on something online. I mean, they were late to the game on the online thing compared to the journal, but they're really moving in online now, and they should be. I mean, they've got the natural franchise for that, and so their economic model's worked out. And I shouldn't go into any more detail on history. Well, it was ringing some, but it was ringing enough. I'll put it that way. I mean, I ran out of money before it quit ringing.
So one company you invested in was GE.
Yeah.
And you did well with that investment.
Yeah, I was too early, actually. If you look back, I was very active in the last half of September and early October, and then I wrote that article in later October. And I knew it was going to get bad. I wrote the article was going to get bad, but I didn't think the stock market would react as much as it did between then and March. So I more or less used up our powder well before the bottom was hit.
How have you avoided not getting back into GE more recently? I mean, I'm sure that they reached out. Everyone says, "Wasn't Warren Buffett invest in GE and save it and take it to the company?"
Well, actually, I think Larry actually is doing a good job. I mean, the sale he made the other day, the Danner, Larry Cole, but the Danner is a good sale, and I think his priorities are straight. And I think I just read the interview he did a few days ago, and he's a very able guy. And he's on the right track, and I'm a fan of GE's in the sense that we're a big buyer from them, we're a big seller to them. I've known the managers. I mean, Jack Welch is a very good friend of mine. We don't agree on politics 100%, but we have a lot of fun together. I love the guy. So I've got a great desire for GE to do well. It just hasn't looked that attractive to me.
Right. You talked about the groves of trees
Yeah.
in the letter shareholder. One was the third grove, which was sort of the in-between stakes.
Yeah, the equity interest.
Yeah. Is it the case that those are sort of not the healthiest grove of trees?
No, those are the Pilot Flying J's. They're companies that under GAAP accounting we have to record under an equity method. We own more than 20%, but we don't control them. And so it's treated under GAAP accounting as a special category, and it didn't fit well in the other growth, so I had to make it a separate growth by itself. It's not that significant a growth.
You say that the sum of Berkshire has a great valuation.
That is true.
Did you ever try to calculate that? How much is that?
Well, it depends on circumstances. I mean, there's sometimes when the float of insurance can be very valuable. There's sometimes when the ability to use production tax credits, we'll say, in the utility business, but have them on our as part of our consolidated return helps. But that varies a lot. But it is a plus. And we can move capital. We'll take a business like See's Candy, which we bought 40-odd years ago. It's a wonderful little business. It throws out capital. We've tried 50 different ways to expand geographically, do all kinds of things. Doesn't work. And we'll try it again, and it won't work. But we can move that capital to help buy the NSF Railroad or do all kinds of other things. So we've got a seamless and tax-efficient way of moving capital where it's needed. And we've got some companies really chew up capital, and we've got others that kick it off. And we can move it from one pot. If you try to do that with your investments, you incur some taxes as you go along doing it, and it's less efficient than what we've done.
You talked a lot about the tax cuts and the benefits to Berkshire. You didn't really get into the costs of the tax cut, which surprised me a little bit. What are the other costs? I mean, is it just free money?
Well, it makes a difference. The tax cut we get, for example, our utilities, as I mentioned in the report, that goes to the customers. That's just the nature of utility regulation. But net, we were a significant beneficiary from the tax cut. I mean, basically, let's just say we had one class of stock we got two, but stock, you and I own a business together, and we think we own all the stock, but the truth is before the tax cut, the government had a 35% share of the stock on income. Now, it didn't have a share of the assets, but it had a share of the income. And if it wanted to change it to 40, it could have changed it, but fortunately it changed it to 21. And if we had a private business, we had a McDonald's franchise together, an auto dealership together, the third shareholder, that invisible shareholder, the government, just handed us back a bunch of the shares of stock, and our shareholders benefited, and a lot of other shareholders benefited.
You talked about RGJ and Greg Abel saying that Berkshire blood flows through their veins. Have they made a difference since they become vice chairs? And then are they like Warren and Charlie?
No, they don't have the interaction. They each run a separate business. Ajit does not think about the other businesses. He thinks about the insurance business, and Greg does not think about the insurance business at all. And I think about the money and the capital and so on. But they're running two very big businesses. I mean, Ajit's business, has, all told, at least a couple $100 billion of assets. And Greg's business has $150 billion of revenues. I mean, they both would fit up there toward the top 10, or so in the country in terms of value. So maybe the top 15. But they're very big businesses.
But they're not exactly like you two guys.
No. Charlie and I have a partnership thinking about the whole place, and we've done it forever, and we still do.
And Todd and Ted? I didn't see that mentioned.
Well, they have $13 billion each, including pension funds, our pension funds, that they run. And so of the $173 billion we had at year end in equities, we had 173, but we had another $8 billion in pension funds. So of the 180 or so, they had 26 between them that they're managing. They got total discretion on that. They don't ask me. At the month end, I look and see what they did. They don't do much. They don't do a lot of trading or anything, but I look to see what changes they made. And Todd, for example, I mean, he made a couple of small investments in private placement type operations. And I know what the business do, but I can't tell you their names. You know, that's just maybe.
Was one of those, you made this investment in Oracle and you sold it, was that something they did?
No, that was not something they did. That was something I did.
Yeah, and you said you didn't understand it, that's why you sold it. Why'd you get it in the first
Yeah, well,
place?
that's a good question to which I do not have a good answer. I see about, I know enough about the club, and no, I don't know enough about the club.
So Barclays put out a note, they said they were lowering the estimates for Berkshire for EPS. Do you read that stuff?
No. Well, I mean, I may read it accidentally, but I don't seek it out to read up with that. But it just doesn't make any difference. You know, I mean, if I spent time reading that, I wouldn't have time to read 10 Ks. And we're not going to do anything different. I don't know what we're going to do. As I put in the annual report, and I really think this is unique. We do not prepare financial statements monthly for Berkshire. And there's just no other company would do it. There's no sense doing it. I know where the money is. I know how the companies are doing generally. But what difference does it make? Because I'm not going to try and hit any numbers for the quarter by having a sale on insurance or doing something even worse. So and Charlie, I mean, he knows where we stand. And you know what businesses are doing well, which aren't. You certainly know where the money is.
Another one, EBS survey of Berkshire investors says the 5 most important things to them are succession, investment performance, M&A opportunity, share repurchase, insurance markets. Do you read
That's
that?
pretty. No, but I don't disagree with that. I mean, I'm glad that somebody understands this. Yeah. Well, that's important. 54. Well, go back to when I started my partnership in 1956, that Berkshire came out of. There were 7 people sitting there at a table having dinner. Relatives primarily, and I said, here's the partnership agreement. It's done under Nebraska law. It's 4 or 5 pages. You don't need to read it. But I said, here's a little half-page, what I call the ground rules. And I want you to read these. And if you feel okay about that, about the interactions, what the expectations are, and all that sort of thing, then we'll join forces. And if you don't, it's fine. Other people, but we can be partners. I mean, if I'm going to have a partnership with somebody, I want to be compatible with it. And when you have a public company, you can't control it. I can't control somebody's company that thinks it's going to be good or this. So by my actions and my communications and everything, I want to attract the people that from the public market that I want, and I want to keep the others away. Costco was built. Sal Price, who started the price system, I think, he sat down and figured out the customer he didn't want. And he set up a system that would keep away the customer he didn't want. He did not want somebody buying a quart of milk, with somebody behind him with a basket of $200 with waiting for that. So we put in a membership fee, and by putting in a membership fee, he killed all the drop-in business, the business that belonged to the 7-Eleven. We want Berkshire to keep out people who have expectations about us and different than ours. I mean, look to them and I hope they find something they fit. But if you're going to run a church, you want your seats to be filled by people who generally want to listen to you, want to relive it, and you don't want to change every week and say, gee, I need a new group, I'll go out and talk to a bunch of investors, get that to become my church. There's only so many seats in the church. There's 645,000 or so A equivalent shares, and those are the seats. And I want them occupied by people that are on the same page I am.
It seems like you've got a big weighting in financials, and of course you've been investing in
They're businesses I understand, and I like the price at which they're selling relative to their future prospects. I think 10 years from now, they'll probably lose more money, and I feel that there's a very high probability I'm right. And I don't think that will turn out to be the best investments at all, the whole pamphlet of things you could do, but I'm pretty sure that they won't disappoint me.
You said you're surprised.
No, in fact, it's kind of the reason, but in the end, nobody was telling me, if somebody told me 10 years ago we're going to have the next 10 years, you're going to make a lot of money in the bond market, but there's always a reason afterwards. Tomorrow's paper will say stocks went down today because of, but they didn't write it this morning's paper, stocks are going to go down today. You have to know what you don't know, and you have to make sure that what you don't know isn't all important. I mean, there's 4 boxes there. You want to get to what is knowable and which is favorable. And there's things that you'll miss out on because they belong to other 3 boxes, one of which will be favorable or another one favorable. And the fact that you're missing out on 90% of the stuff doesn't really make any difference if the 10% you do is right.
Is climate change changing your business?
No, it doesn't change the insurance business.
Change bottom line.
No, it would change our insurance business if we were writing 20-year policies. I mean, if there was something that changed life mortality adversely to the interest of life insurance, you're stuck with a policy for 20 years if you like life insurance policy. And you keep paying your premiums adversely. That can happen in long-term insurance. But when you write a policy for 1 year at a time, see what the developments are. And, cars, for example, are much safer to drive than they used to be. 15 cents per 100 million miles driven. Now it's a little over 1. On the other hand, they become much more expensive to fix. And that little side right side view mirror costs $10 now $1,000 or something like that. So you have things that are changing in terms of you're writing collision experience, insurance, you got to allow for the fact that windshield, the bumper, all that thing with the side view mirror and all that is way less expensive. But if you're writing liability, you know that people aren't going to die as often. So climate change is climate can change it. But the truth is that you now can buy really big catastrophe limits cheaper than you could buy them in 2005 or thereabouts, allowing for changes in the dollar and compensation population. So far, rates have come down. That's the reason we've gotten out of the cat business. We were a very big writer of cat business 10 or 12 years ago. We aren't out of the cat business because of climate change. The prices aren't right. And the world will change. And that's very serious consequences. But it won't change that much from year to year. But we've done very well during a period of time.
Faster than our ability to understand. Social media, Facebook, Google, Russian girls,
well, I think cyber is totally real. We're not forgetting the problem even misinformation. I'm just thinking that we have railroads running over 22,000 miles of track, and some of them are carrying ammonia, and some of them are carrying chlorine, and we have to carry it. We have no choice about that. And I would rather do that in a non-cyber world than a cyber world. There are all kinds of things. The problem with something like cyber is that it's moving and it's just unpredictable. Whether you'll get some crazy guy like the Anthrax, what they can do becomes magnified. We saw that 19 guys did 9/11. I mean, tools in the hands or potentially in the hands of either crazy individuals crazy groups or even a few crazy governments are really something. And we don't necessarily know what all the tools they have are, and that is moving all the time. Again, Einstein said, I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. I mean, it's a dangerous world.
I don't know if you've been following this, Warren, but what do you think of Elon Musk's behavior in this area?
Well, I think it has room for improvement. And he would say the same thing. Some people have talent for interesting emotions. Others have a little bit more of a barker up there. But he's a remarkable guy. But I just don't see the necessity to communicate with him. I think I've had 7 tweets because a friend of mine signed me up for it, and he's called me about 100 times thinking I tweet this or that. And I said yes to her 7 times, I guess, or something like that. I've never actually written one myself. I don't even know how to do it.
Are you talking about
He joined the Giving Club, so once or twice, but that's a lot of years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. He hasn't come to our annual gathering, so I haven't seen him.
We're here with Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, and one of the talking about China. And I wonder if you have something to say to Chinese investors.
Wang Yang.
Perfect. Great answer.
We'll come back to the rest of this in Chinese if you prefer.
So let's talk about this trade war that's going on with China. I guess I'd like to ask you, do you think that Donald Trump was right in calling out the Chinese government basically putting them out?
I won't have any comment on that. In terms of political activity, I don't put my citizenship in a blind trust. So when the election comes around, I'll do it. On the other hand, people will interpret things I say about any president as to some extent coming from nurture, and they don't come from nurture. I think let's talk about China, but I can't talk to you about that part.
Fair enough. I mean, you think there's room for improvement and
Well, I think that China and the United States absolutely that's going to be superpowers beyond my great-grandchildren's lives, and will always be competitors, and we'll be competitors in business, we'll be competitors in ideas, all kinds of ways. There's no other way it would be. And we just have to make sure that competition doesn't get us to a point where we don't realize that the best world is one in which both the United States and China function. I mean, we do not want to have an island of prosperity in the rest of the world, envious of us in a nuclear age, and China doesn't. Russia doesn't. I mean, we all recognize the dangers of letting competition get out of control and become you can be competitors without being enemies, and that's what all powerful nations have to realize over time. I mean, it's different than 200 years ago when you could have some dominant country, and then they may have done some things you didn't like, but they didn't threaten the existence of the world. You really threaten the existence of the world. As you know, important countries do not constantly recognize and compete and fight over certain things that they can't regard as essentially the equivalent of war.
do you think the U.S. and China will be able to resolve it?
I don't think conflicts are unavoidable, but I think it has to be active thinking on the part of every hugely powerful country, and Russia's a huge part. I mean, 90% of the nuclear arms in the world is in the U.S. and Russia. They have to recognize that the best world for them is one where they don't grab all the apples, and we have to recognize that. And we can't, the United States can't think that either our ideas about the world, or we start getting aggressive about them, and China can't get that, Russia can't get that. And that's obvious. You just have to make things escalate. World War I, with an archduke. I mean, you get chance incidents, and you really want to. I asked one of the presidents one time, from the Soviet War, right in the middle when I was somebody coming to him and saying, absolutely, if they ever launched, would you launch on that? And he said, 10 minutes ago. I wouldn't want to have that responsibility, but you want to make sure you don't get to that point. Yeah, the answer is we would. Yeah, we would. We've been made aware of things.
Are you concerned on the flip side of the concern that the laws different, that the economy might be okay?
Well, I want to be sure I understood the accounting, obviously. Some businesses that easier to do than others. But I know the laws, the customs, the accounting, the people better in the United States than myself. So there's some small hurdle in many countries to get over, which I can get over. I mean, but I just don't, it's just not as easy as looking at something that I already know the answer, from previous transactions or something. So it's easier to make a big acquisition. I'm looking beyond the borders. So I love the idea of doing it. When we made the acquisition in Israel, I didn't know what tax rates were there. I didn't know what corporate law. I suspected that it would all be answered satisfactorily, which it was, but I didn't just automatically know it. I don't think so. I'm open. Yeah, we made 2 decent-sized stock acquisitions there, and Berkshire Klein, Wealth After China, and BYD. Yeah, BYD was Charlie's, but Charlie's very well versed in that.
China. Is that something that worries you?
Well, I wrote an article about it for Fortune in the same situation many years ago, when our deficit got to be large in relation to GDP. I don't think it's affected by the trade balance, but I think that if the trade deficit gets large and it looks like we have no way out from it, that can be a real problem over time. I mean, you're shipping little pieces of paper to the rest of the world, and they're shipping you goods. I mean, people are working, making underwear or shoes someplace, and you get little pieces of paper from us. And it gets very tempting if you've done that enough to make sure that those pieces of paper aren't worth very much over time when they want to cash them or something. So you don't want to have. We don't have any problem with trade deficit, but if we have really large ones, and we can work as well as a box where if we have a solution to the numbers down, it could be a problem. I wrote about it. It's kind of a nice thing, actually. Just, I mean, wouldn't you like to have something where you just have a piece of paper and somebody can supply you with your food or your... You're all, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, we call it credit cards in the United States.
Okay. Last question. China's facing a slow growth.
5%, 6%. Are you concerned about this slowing growth?
Well, I don't worry about the global market. I mean, China's going to grow a lot. I mean, when you think of what's happened, it was 1949 or but there's been nothing really like it. We had 20% of the world population at that time. We had the achieved potential, the intellectual capacity, they had decent soil, all kinds of things. I mean, and what's happened there almost beyond belief. And that came down over, but we've had incredible developments in the United States. I mean, real GDP per capita is 6 times what it was today in the United States. 6 times. And we thought we were pretty dumb country. No, my parents wouldn't believe it. I mean, they really thought, this kid has really got it made. I think more than the United States, it was true. I mean, we had a tailwind, and China's had a hurricane mind, in these decades. Absolutely. Yeah, no, yeah, they're back, and they've found a way of life that is dramatically different than existed for the billion. There was a billion, maybe a billion, 2 or 3, whatever it is now, and they have changed the country really of size. I don't think there's ever done anything like it. We've done it too, but it took somewhat longer. I mean, it was more stretched out. It was remarkable, but when you go to, I think there in 1995, and then they regarded it as a miracle, and then I went back 10 years later. It was a whole different country beyond that.
How would you
Well, I've said many times that if you get to be 65 or 70 and later, and the people that you want to have love you actually do love you, you're a success. I've never seen anybody that reaches that age. I mean, I'm not talking about somebody that's in extreme poverty or pain, but I've never seen anybody that you have a lot of people that love them, that is other than happy, and I've seen some very, very wealthy people that doesn't want to go into school and everything. Nobody loves it. You know, kids would say, he's in the attic, okay. Well, by far the best investment you can make is in yourself. For example, communication skills. I tell the students that come that they're going to graduate schools and business, and they're learning all these complicated formulas and all that. If they just learn to communicate better, both in writing and in person, they increase their value at least 50%. I mean, you can't communicate. Somebody says, it's like winking on a girl in the dark. Nothing happens, basically. And you have to be able to hold your ideas. And that's relatively easy. I did it myself with the alternative. But some people wish I take a shorter course now. But it's just hugely important. And if you invest in yourself, nobody can take it away from you. The second thing, I'm not sure criticism for not living it, but I do tell those please, that if I give you a car and I give you one car, you live your life, you take care of it like you can't do it. Scratch it, I'm only going to be the older man, and keep it alive, all these things. You get exactly one mind and one body in this world. And you can't start taking care of it when you're 50. I've been able to rush it out if you haven't done anything. So you should really be sure that you just remember that you just got one mind and body to get your life living. Well, life advice is the most important thing. Aside from what I've talked about, it's who you associate with. You want to associate with people that are better than you. I mean, basically, you'll go in the direction of the people that you associate with, and you want to have the right heroes. You want people, if you want to emulate somebody, you better pick very carefully who you want to emulate. And when, obviously, you can't pick your parents. They're going to have an enormous influence on you, but you don't get a choice on that. But you get choices as you go down the line, and who you admire, who you want to copy. And the most important for most people in terms of that decision is a spouse. It's also important to a partner in business, a partner in life is the most important. You want to pick a spouse that's a little bit better than you are. And he or she, you hope they don't figure it out too fast. Well, they just don't realize that all you have to do is just buy process in America, and then listen to people like me or read the papers or do anything subsequent. They think that because you can trade, you should trade. If you buy a farm, you buy an apartment house, you can't resell it tomorrow. It costs moving on. Now you get something handed to you, liquidity, which is instant. You can sell them. The cost is going into pennies, compared to other kinds of investment. So because they can so easily move around, they do move around. And moving around is not smarter than investing. Well, and I'll actually send somebody over about to get me something. The publicity I got from earlier describing my habits of value. I now somebody that's something on the office, but that was more for entertainment value. I eat exactly what I like to eat. I liked it on my 6th birthday. And my 6th birthday party when we had hot dogs and hamburgers and cold and ice cream. So I still like it. And I don't care about anything subsequently. I discovered it all by the time I was if somebody offered me a deal when I was 20, so we're going to live 1 year longer, and I said, well, 88, or 89, or 11, maybe, it'd be nothing but broccoli and Brussels sprouts and onions and all these things. I just, take the last year off, it probably won't be that good anyway. So I'm not interested in that area. Well, I just don't have a like onion, but I don't put them in the same category.
Is business school worth it?
Depends on the person, much more than it depends on the school. I mean, I wouldn't worry. Some people are going to get a lot out of advanced education, and some people are going to get very little. And I don't even think it's important that every person go to college at all. I mean, we have all kinds of jobs at $70 or $1,000 a year, $80,000 a year. That college training is not of use. And I actually was not keen on going to college myself. Yeah, my dad kind of jolly man, but he didn't get me to do anything. But if they had an SAT test, he would have taken the test for me. but I do like to have a good time. I like investing, and I didn't really feel I could read the books. So I don't. It's a big commitment to take 4 years, and the cost involved, and the loans involved. And I think depending on what your interests are in life, I don't think it's for everybody. I think it's for a lot of people. But there ought to be a reason you're going, and I didn't really see much reason. Only under duress. It's undoubtedly it's my way. Well, I like the Bridge on the River Kwai because there are a lot of lessons in that puzzle. Enormously fascinating movie. I mean, yeah, very. But the ending of that was sort of the story of life. He created the railroad. The enemy to come across it. Well, the favorite book, the book that had the most impact on my life.
it's probably going to be it'll be Nebraska in some huge bowl game and winning.
And finally, what do you carry in your wallet? How much money?
Well, I probably carry maybe $400. I actually, my wife likes to use cash, so I just take home a chunk of cash every now and then. And she doles it out. She looks at my billfold and sees where all the hundreds are going. It's pretty simple. I've got an American Express card, which I got in 1964, but I pay cash 98% of the time. If I'm at a restaurant, I pay cash. It's just easier.
Hello, investors. I'm Zach Guzman. Thank you so much for checking out the Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Don't forget to click right here to subscribe. And don't forget to check out our live market coverage every day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time right here on the Yahoo Finance YouTube channel.
It's 10 a.m. in London, 5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Kriti Gupta with your Bloomberg Brief. Bonnie Quinn is on assignment. Let's get started with what you need to know. A terrible week for tech. Valuation worries knocking global equity. The shares of MedCap stocks sell off despite pockets of positive earnings reports. And the Tesla trillionaire shareholders approve a $1 trillion compensation package to Elon Musk, marking the largest payout ever awarded to a CEO. And airlines across the United States begin canceling flights as the government shutdown drags on. We are live on the ground. In the meantime, let's get a quick check on these markets. As of course we go into the weekend, everything's fine. Futures are positive, virtually unchanged on the S&P. E-minis there, 67.50 where we are on those contracts. Same story for the Nasdaq. The Russell higher by 0.1%. But right off the bat, this really tells you what kind of market we're in. Kind of a sleepy one on this Friday. Let's see if the bond market is any different, because I actually think that maybe we're getting a little bit more action here. Looking across the curve, looking at a 10-year that's higher by about 2 basis points. Similar story on the long end of the curve, and frankly on the short end as well. So maybe we'll see a little more action as the day progresses. In the meantime, still from the macros to micro, get some more stocks to watch with Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Kriti. Let's start with Tesla, which is up this morning after Elon Musk said he expects China to fully approve the self-driving software by next March. This follows a lot of lobbying in the last few years, and Tesla is really banking on this to revive sales in a market which is losing quite a lot of ground. Moving on to Expedia, which is also up this morning. The online travel agency reported quite strong results thanks to resilient travel demand. So alongside results from Airbnb, this really goes to show signals that the US travel market is in pretty good shape, and that reassured investors. And finally, over here in the UK, the property listing portal Rightmove is down massively this morning after saying it expects a flat revenue growth because of AI investments. So shares fell the most on record, and now it puts pressure on management to convince investors that now is the right time to be making those massive investment decisions.
All right, Chloe Melly there with some of our early movers in the free market, of course, in the European hours. Thank you so much. Later this hour, we're taking a closer look at the labor market with Citi's Veronica Clark. She'll be joining the program shortly. But first, let's talk about this $1 trillion pay package for Elon Musk.
Sixth and finally, on the 2025 CEO Performance Award to our founder and CEO Elon Musk, with over 75% voting in favor. Approved.
Joining us now for the latest Bloomberg Global Autos editor, Craig Trudell. Craig, I don't know what you do with $1 trillion, but I am curious as we talk about this kind of pay package. How did we get here? How viable is it that he ultimately gets the $1 trillion?
I guess what you do is you dance with a humanoid robot, because that's what we saw Musk did after that moment last night. That at least is step one. I guess some of the things that he threw out there yesterday were really sort of over the top, even for him, talking about sending Tesla vehicles to the moon and Mars. The robot that is still very much a prototype that does sort of simple tasks like dancing on the stage or handing out candy at the stock exchange last week. Eventually, that's going to be a really good surgeon. He says he's going to have to make good on at least some of these really out there ambitions to realize this pay package, because Tesla has to go from roughly a $1.5 trillion company to $8.5 trillion worth of market cap, and he has to grow their earnings by many multiples as well. So whether or not he actually receives all of the stock that is made available to him, pending all of these performance metrics, a lot of these sort of further out targets are going to be really tough to hit.
Well, as you speak, we're showing a graphic of Elon Musk basically tweeting, or formerly tweeting, truthing, I think is what it's called now, depending on your social platform, saying there's a lot of rabbits to pull out of the hat. In the meantime, let's talk about the rabbits he has successfully pulled out of the hat in the previous iterations, and that, of course, is Tesla's exposure to China. It looks like China's set to fully approve the full self-driving vehicle early next year. Is that going to come to fruition, Craig?
Yeah, I guess that was an interesting tidbit from last night's presentation, because there was a full-on push on his part, actually going back last year, for him to go to China and sort of cancel on Modi in India at the last minute to meet with the premier in China and get a regulatory approval for what Tesla calls full self-driving. They interestingly have not been able to actually market it as that in China, because the system has to be monitored at all time. It is not actually capable of driving the car itself. And it will be sort of I guess we'll see whether or not the ministry actually is willing to give him the approval that he says they've communicated to the company could come in the sort of early part of next year. What we've seen is that the regulators in China have been pretty conservative and slow to approve this sort of technology, and also that there's been greater scrutiny on crashes involving these systems. And so while that may be the sort of rough plan or the tentative timeline that's been given, it remains to be seen whether that has sort of staying power and will be something for us to watch in the sort of end of first quarter, early second quarter of next year.
All right, Craig Trudell, our Global Autos editor, we thank you so much, walking us through the dynamics of, again, a $1 trillion unprecedented pay package. Over in Washington, President Trump, in the meantime, pushing for a rare earth deal.
One of the key items on our agenda is critical minerals. In recent weeks, my administration has strengthened American economic security by forging agreements with allies and friends across the world to broaden our critical mineral supply chain.
The President of the United States there. I just want to get to some headlines that kind of echo the exact sentiment he said in that piece of sound. China looks like it's going to be suspending export control on some rare earths, some super hard materials, as well as some of the export curves until November 10th of 2026. Those headlines, of course, crossing the Bloomberg terminal. They're also saying that the suspension is part of the trade truce agreement. Bloomberg's Brendan Murray is here on set to walk us through some of this. We kind of knew this was coming based on the readout of the two sides.
Yeah, this is the implementation of the pledges that the two leaders, President Xi and Trump, made in Asia recently. And so this is what the U.S. wants to see. It wants to see not just the promises that they've made, but the actual actions taken. Now, we'll have to wait and see in the data whether those critical minerals continue to flow. But in the meantime, President Trump has met with the Central Asian leaders, and the U.S. is trying to diversify its supply chains more broadly. He did that throughout his trip to Asia last week with Japan, Malaysia, and some other countries. So this is really the race that the U.S. is on to catch up to China's dominance in rare earths.
We actually saw some of the data come out from China today, where they did actually see some of the export volumes maybe drop. But there are other parts of the world that are perhaps picking up where China is leaving off.
Yeah, exactly. China. These were the October trade numbers, and so this was at the very most of the tariffs that the U.S. have applied, and a lot of exports to the U.S. went elsewhere. I think the drop was about 25%. By the same token, we saw Taiwan's exports really surge to levels we haven't seen in a long time, and that's based on semiconductors. And semiconductors, of course, are exempt from the U.S. tariff. So those continue to flow into industries like artificial intelligence, where the boom continues nonstop.
Talk to us a little bit very, very quickly. We're also expecting Viktor Orban to be at the White House today. Does that affect any of these trade flows at all?
It's part of the transactional diplomacy. Orban's going to come and promise to buy U.S. LNG and some nuclear fuels, and so it's part of the delicate balance that the Trump administration is trying to strike with countries that also have alliances with China and Russia.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. The bromance has been in the works for some time to fall apart. Today, Bloomberg's Martin Murray walking us through plenty of those trade details. We thank you so much. Let's go back to the corporate space. Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have secured deals with the Trump administration to slash prices for their blockbuster weight loss drugs, all in exchange for tariff relief.
Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have agreed to provide all of their other medications to Medicaid at most favored nations prices. Most favored nations, meaning that you will pay the lowest price anywhere in the world. That's what you're going to pay. Whereas before they paid low prices and we paid, thousands of percentile ahead.
Let's get more on this from out of our Copenhagen Bureau. Our Bureau Chief Sarah Soyland joins us this morning. Sarah, just walk us through what we learned here. I mean, is this enough to maybe get some of the pressure off the likes of Novo Nordisk and some of the other pharmaceutical companies here in Europe?
Well, it's definitely enough to take off some of that political pressure. That's been one of the things that we've been focusing on for Novo Nordisk. As we reported in recent days, there's a lot of stuff going on for the company. They're being squeezed by competition in the US and also trying to take over Metsera. So this is really nice to know that there's at least one thing now that we know is settled. An agreement was largely expected, and the outcome is pretty much as anticipated. Novo Nordisk has already come out and said that they're estimated there'll be a low single-digit negative impact on group revenue for the next year. But analysis that I've talked to, they point out that this will be mitigated by the potential in the market now. So now they will get wider Medicare access, so they have the potential to reach a lot more customers. So it might get a lower price, but then you're expanding the market. So on the short term, we're seeing it remove some of the regulatory risks. We know they won't keep getting hit by tariff levels in the coming years. Things continue as they are now. So now we just have to sort of people roll up the sleeve and get to operate under the new conditions. But the political noise, if you will, has just been one of the issues for Novo lately. So we're still waiting to really see everything from the transformation plan pan out.
Talk to us a little bit as well about the Metsera deal. You had mentioned it, of course. This is something where Novo, although decreasing the prices in the States, is increasing their bid for this company. Can you just explain to us and to our global audience why a company that only has 100 employees?
I think that's a question a lot of people are asking themselves at the moment. So as I see, there's an arms race going on in the obesity market right now. Pfizer doesn't really have an obesity asset, so they really want to buy something to get into this very lucrative market. Novo Nordisk, as we know, they have a really popular product, but they're losing out to Eli Lilly at the moment. We're not sure if the pipeline is strong enough to stand up against some of the other competitors. So this is a way of buying a new product to the pipeline. And they're saying this is really complementary. It will reach out to more of the patients and obviously be something that really fits with the company. So we have these two companies, big global pharma companies, that just want this asset. And I guess only time will tell if this is the right price or if they will end up overpaying.
All right, Bloomberg Sarah Soyland, we thank you so much. Our Bureau Chief out of Copenhagen, walking us through this very juicy, starting to get juicy story between Pfizer, Novo Nordisk, and of course Metsera. We thank you so much. Let's go to the other top story trending on the Bloomberg terminal this morning and kick it off with shares of British Airways parent IAG sliding after saying its all-important North Atlantic route experienced some weakness in the third quarter. Of course, weighing on earnings that missed estimates, North Atlantic accounts for about a third of the company's total capacity. European airlines have been cautioning for months that passenger demand in the United States is more restrained. And Goldman Sachs promoted a record number of staff within its Asia-Pacific Private Wealth Management Unit to Managing Director. The biggest number came from the Global Banking and Markets Division. Globally, Goldman promoted the smallest proportion of women to Managing Directors since CEO David Solomon, of course, at the helm of the company, took the job in 2018. And China's exports contracted in October, falling 1.1% from a year earlier. Global demand failed to offset the slump in shipments to the United States. And shipments to all other nations except the U.S. rose 3.1%. It was not enough to compensate for the more than 25% decline to America, something we were just talking to our correspondent Brendan Murray about. Coming up on the program, we go from tennis to business. We hear from Serena Williams on her life after a legendary career and the learning curve that came with launching a venture firm. That conversation coming up next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Preeti Gupta in London. Welcome back. Nearly a decade after launching Serena Ventures, Serena Williams channeling her competitive spirit into investing. She spoke with Bloomberg Danny Berger at the American Business Forum in Miami about planting the seeds of her business career far before she left tennis.
I don't like the word retired, but when I evolved from tennis, I had already been investing for, 8 years at the time. I'd already had my firm. I'd already built a great team of people that were way smarter than me around the table. And it wasn't something that I would just have a hard fall from. I felt like I wanted to have a softer landing, which I don't know if I did or if I didn't. I wanted to have a softer landing, but I also didn't want to start something new when I just finished something. And that's something, again, my dad always told me, you can't go into something brand new when you finish. You need to already have it started. You need to already have a plan. If you don't have that plan, then it's going to be difficult to start something new. And so I was really grateful for that, because if I were to have started investing now after I retired, oh my gosh, the learning curve and doing everything, it would have taken years and years. And a lot of that experience was already done while I was playing. So,
it's such a good point that it is the model now that as an athlete, you're almost expected to be so much more than that. But even so, there have been a lot of public figures who've decided to go into investing, especially because you were early on in doing that. Did you face any sort of stereotypes of people rolling their eyes saying, what is an athlete doing in business?
I did. Not too many, but there are obviously a lot of people rolling their eyes and saying, what are you doing in investing? But again, that now was over 15 years ago. So I definitely was earlier on, I was much earlier on in the curve when it came to investing. And it was something that was really innate that I just kind of flowed to. And that was something that really just attracted me. And it was actually early stage investing that really attracted me for whatever reason at the time. Of course, I didn't know it was called early stage. I didn't know what anything was. I didn't know what a seed was. I didn't know any of that stuff. It was just really great learning experience. I love what Jamie Dimon said earlier, how life is really just about learning. You're learning every single day. And that's kind of a theory that I love. And that's one thing I love about VC. Every time I step into the office, I feel like I'm in college. I'm learning something new about some other product and what it does and what it doesn't do and how we don't have it yet.
Serena Williams there speaking with Bloomberg's Danny Berger at the American Business Forum. Really fascinating conversation. I encourage everyone to go watch it on Bloomberg's platforms. In the meantime, a quick check on these markets. Of course, we are getting closer and closer to the U.S. cash open, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, futures are not giving us much. Shares only down to 1/10%. We are seeing some strength in the dollar, though. You're seeing that affect the euro. You're seeing that affect the pound as well. The 10-year that is higher is probably where the dollar is getting its cue from. Coming up on the program, travelers brace for disruption as the U.S. government shutdown threatens holiday flights. We're on that and the other top stories making headlines across your front pages next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the Bloomberg Brief. I'm Preeti Gupta here in London. Time now for your front page news. First up, it's the Washington Post. Travelers bracing for turmoil as flight cuts kick in at major U.S. airports. Airlines have canceled hundreds of flights to comply with the shutdown-related FAA directive to reduce traffic at 40 airports, which include New York, Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. Next up is the New York Times. The federal judges ordered the Trump administration to fully fund food stamps for roughly 42 million low-income Americans. The Justice Department almost immediately told the court that it would appeal the ruling that Vice President J.D. Vance attacked the court for what was described as a, quote, absurd ruling. Moving on to the Wall Street Journal, Blackstone offloading a flopped $1.8 billion investment in senior housing, which has resulted in more than $600 million in losses. Now, Blackstone began substantially unwinding the senior housing bet in 2022 and has already sold about 90 senior facilities as a whole. We'll continue to monitor those stories for you on Bloomberg across the Bloomberg programming on both sides of the Atlantic. Anytime, a quick check on these markets here, because when you look at the futures picture, it's not giving you much. It's only down by about 0.1%. Euro unchanged at 115. That was not the story earlier today, where you did see some dollar strength actually push the euro down. That has been a key trend here. 114 seems to be the line in the sand of the currency move. Can't actually breach. On the other hand, maybe it's getting its cue from the Treasury move that you're seeing here. U.S. 10-year higher by about 2 basis points. Maybe that's what's driving the strength in the dollar, although you have seen that correlation start to come out for just a little bit. In the meantime, I want to give you a quick check on what's happening on this side of the Atlantic here, because perhaps maybe getting a little bit more action. Before I jinx, I definitely want to check. We definitely are. The stocks have down about 0.5%. A good chunk of that move is coming from the healthcare space. The Novo Nordisk story, AstraZeneca, the drug pricing conversation over in the States, very much having a tradable effect right here in Europe. Brent crude is another one higher by about 1.5% this morning. But keep an eye on this. Excuse me, NYMEX crude, I should say. Trading at about $60 a barrel. Brent crude is at about 64, 65. So you are seeing that spread between Brent and WTI start to widen just a little bit. It's interesting. You're seeing a 2%, almost 2% move. I'm rounding up here in the oil space, despite not much action in the equity market. Maybe that's something that's going to come together a little bit later. And lastly, we are looking at the pound, 131 on cable, down about 0.3%. When I was talking about the dollar strength, it is showing up in currencies around the world, and certainly right here in Europe as well. And that's something that's going to be really driven by some of the data that we get later today, which brings us nicely to our pushing ahead to the UMich Sentiment Survey. Is something we're going to be discussing. Citi's Veronica Clark is going to be the economist joining us on the show. Should we be worried ultimately about some of these concerns that we are seeing in the data? Should we be concerned about the ripple effects that we're seeing in the market? Is the wealth effect very much something that's going to show up in the next couple of weeks? That's the conversation we're going to have with Veronica Clark, Citi's U.S. economist. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. It's 10:30 a.m. in London, 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Katie Gupta with your Bloomberg Brief. Bonnie Quinn is on assignment. Let's get to what you need to know this morning. It's been a terrible week for tech. Valuation worries knocking global equities. The shares of mega-cap tech stocks sell off despite pockets of positive earnings reports just here and there. Plus, of course, the Tesla trillionaire shareholders approving a $1 trillion compensation package to Elon Musk, marking the largest payout ever awarded to a CEO. And airlines across the United States begin canceling flights as the government shutdown drags on. We are live on the ground. A quick check on these markets here, because you are seeing futures not go anywhere in a hurry. S&P futures virtually flat right now, 67.43 on those E-mini contracts. Nasdaq 100 futures a similar story, not moving up, not moving down. Maybe that shakes out as we get closer and closer to the opening bell. In the meantime, the Treasuries market is kind of where you see maybe a little bit more action. All 2 basis point move across the curve in the 30-year and the 10-year, 410 on that 10-year, ahead of maybe a little bit of UMich data later later today, I should say. For some more stocks to watch, let's go to Chloe Melly. Chloe. Good morning, Pretty. Tesla is up slightly this morning after shareholders approved a $1 trillion pay package to Musk. And Musk also said that he expects China to fully approve self-driving software by early next year. So this is something that Tesla has been really banking on to revive sales in a market, the Chinese market, where it has been losing quite a lot of ground to domestic rivals. Moving on to the online travel agency Expedia, which is also up this morning, quite impressively, at 16% after reporting really strong results thanks to resilient travel demand. So alongside results from Airbnb, this really confirmed that the US travel market is in pretty good shape, and that reassured investors this morning. And finally, the video game publisher Take-Two is down this morning in pre-market trading after delaying once again the release of Grand Theft Auto, the much anticipated title. This actually overshadowed what has otherwise been quite strong results for that company.
All right, Chloe Melly, walking us through some of those early movers. We thank you so much. In the meantime, let's go right back to the macro. Investors awaiting the latest UMich sentiment data from mixed private jobs data from earlier this week. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but I know someone who does. Veronica Clark, U.S. economist over at Citi, joins the program this morning. Veronica, a couple days ago, we got the Challenger data. It was enough to move the markets, even though we don't really see Challenger data move the markets very much. How much stock should we be putting into a data set like that?
Yeah, it is a bit frustrating when we're not getting the official government data. We're kind of grasping for straws and trying to take signals from any of these other third-party data sets. I think that Challenger job number, just kind of confirms what we were seeing in some of these headlines a couple weeks ago, that there are some bigger layoffs at some bigger companies, at least attention grabbing. I think for now, I would be really cautious to take those announced layoff plans and translate them to what that means for the hard data. We are fortunately still getting the weekly initial and continuing jobless claims numbers. We're getting that from the states, and we didn't see a substantial move higher in initial claims in that data that we got yesterday. So those layoffs, if they are bigger, they're not quite showing up in the hard data yet.
Veronica, that data showed actual job losses as opposed to just not hiring. I think that's a really key distinction that this market maybe not really recognizing right now. It feels like the market is treating the U.S. economy the same as if it were slowing down, as the same as if it were, say, a recession. Veronica, where are we on kind of the economic cycle? Are we in a slowdown? Is a recession right around the corner, or are we seeing a reacceleration?
Yeah, I think most, at least our expectation and most other expectations are that we're in this slowdown. We're not in that recessionary scenario yet. But I would say this has been a very low hiring labor market for a while, and we've seen pockets of weakness in the hard data, pockets of stability. But what hasn't changed is we have not seen a pickup in hiring, and I think I would want to see actual demand for workers start to pick up and recover before I wouldn't be worried that layoffs are that next step.
Well, Veronica, that brings to me about a big question here, because it felt like a lot of the maybe hiring pauses and freezes we were getting was really a function of some of the kind of back and forth tariff policy, trade policy, regulation, et cetera. Now that there is a trade truce in place, at least for another 12 months, we got Chinese confirmation of that earlier today. Do you think that some of those hiring freezes are going to unfreeze?
I'm not really expecting that. The uncertainty that we had over the summer, it could be one aspect of the weaker jobs data that we had over the summer. But this has really been happening for 2 years. This predates all the tariff and policy uncertainty from this year. Of course, we had the weaker jobs data last summer. That's why when the Fed started cutting in 2024, they started big with a 50 basis point cut. So this has been happening not necessarily consistently, but happening before this year.
Well, it takes us nicely to the data set we're going to get later today. And that, of course, is the UMich consumer sentiment data. Veronica, is that data set going to be a positive one, given that the market's been selling off in a really big way?
Yeah. It's consumers are of course sensitive to what they're hearing about what's happening in markets. They're very sensitive also, especially in that University of Michigan survey, to what they're experiencing in terms of prices. So if we see some stickiness in inflation, some price increases, people tend to feel worse about that. I think the most important elements are maybe how people are feeling about the labor market, because we don't have the best signals right now. We don't have the hard data, unfortunately. But how people are feeling, perceiving job availability could maybe be telling us something too. We certainly see in the conference board data, not this UMich one, but some of the labor market indicators in that one do look like people are feeling worse about the labor market.
Talk to us then about what other data sets we should look at. It doesn't seem like the government shutdown is going to be ending anytime soon. In fact, maybe prolonged even further. But just walk us through the actual ramifications of some of that, first from the data front and then from the economic front.
Yeah, the longer that the shutdown lasts, the bigger the drag becomes. And there is this idea that, you will be back paying a lot of these workers. A lot of this activity could be made up. But the longer it lasts, some of that drag, I think, becomes more permanent. There are just, you don't go out to eat at a restaurant. You're not going to necessarily backfill that kind of activity. Certainly all the travel issues. Once we get the data, where we fortunately do have things like those state initial and continuing jobless claims numbers, they kind of tell us that, things are not getting dramatically weaker in the labor market, but they're not getting better either. So I think once we see eventually the official data, it'll be the same story of, job growth is essentially averaging close to flat. That's a pretty soft labor market. And the trend, of course, is what's more concerning, has just been getting weaker.
All right, Veronica Clark of Citi walking us through some of the data that we can expect, some of the data we should take away from the job story, and then, of course, the impact on the government shutdown. We thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's get to the other top stories that are trending on the Bloomberg terminal. Kicking it off with commodity trader Gunberg Group, which has withdrawn its offer for the international assets of sanctioned Russian oil producer Lukoil. The move comes after the U.S. Treasury Department called it, quote, the Kremlin's puppet, and said that the oil and gas trader would never get a license. And Goldman is promoting the small share of women to managing director since David Solomon became CEO. Women make up 27% of the new class, down from 31% in 2023. They also promoted a record number of staff within its Asia-Pacific private wealth unit to managing director. And over in the Middle East, Israel launched some of its heaviest airstrikes on Lebanon since its ceasefire with Hezbollah about a year ago. They targeted Hezbollah weapons sites and infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The attacks have stoked fears that two sides will revert to a war. Lebanon's president called strikes a, quote, full-fledged crime. Coming up on the program, we go right back to the corporate space. A $1 trillion pay deal for Elon Musk. Tesla shareholders approving the biggest compensation package in history. What does it mean for the company, though? We'll get the details next. This is Bloomberg.
Sixth and finally, on the 2025 CEO Performance Award to our founder and CEO Elon Musk, with over 75% voting in favor. Approved.
A historic first. Tesla shareholders approving a $1 trillion compensation package for Elon Musk. The pay agreement clearing a path for the CEO, the world's richest person, to become the first ever trillionaire. Now, I don't know what you do with $1 trillion if you get it, but maybe our next guest does. Bloomberg Global Business Editor Jamie Nimmo joins the program this morning. Jamie, I won't ask you how to spend $1 trillion. I'm sure you've got plenty of ideas, but I am curious what this means for this company. There's some pretty lofty targets he has to hit to actually get $1 trillion.
Yeah, I was thinking about that question. What would I do with $1 trillion? I'm not sure anyone knows. I'm not sure even Elon Musk knows. It might have something to do with Mars, I guess. There's some pretty lofty targets here. Along the way, they've got to hit your market cap, targets along the way, as well as operational targets, including vehicle numbers and so on. Pretty stretching. Some of them aren't as stretching as you might imagine. The vehicle targets, slightly more attainable, the early targets. This happens in segments. So if he hits each step, he'll get a certain amount. So that makes it a little bit easier. I mean, we're talking about a shift to EVs globally. It might be happening a bit more slowly at the moment, but ultimately it will happen. And that some of those targets will be slightly easier to hit, I'd imagine.
Well, talk to us a little bit about, as they are looking for these lofty targets, Tesla's approach to China here. Musk also said there might be some approvals coming their way.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure what those are at the moment, but China's a key market for all automakers globally, especially Tesla. A key EV market there, something like more than 50% of new car sales are electric, which is way ahead of major markets like the US and other markets in Europe. So a key market for Tesla to crack. And that market particularly will be probably the key to unlocking that growth and hitting those targets to hit that $1 trillion mark.
Is that something that Elon Musk is going to spearhead? I mean, we know that was one of the big advantages that Tesla used to have, how they were operating in the Chinese market. Is that still a win for Tesla, or under this administration, is it kind of an Achilles heel?
I mean, it's proving difficult for everyone at the moment. I mean, we've seen the European automakers really sort of pull back from China, finding it really tricky there. You've got BYD and others, the local players, pushing hard, and there's a real price war going on. So that market is really tricky at the moment. Now, how it plays out over the next few years, who knows? And as luxury spending kind of recovers, people start to spend a bit more on Tesla vehicles and others like it. It might start to increase demand. That might help them there. But it's clearly a key market that they'll be spending a lot of time and trying to work out how to crack.
All right, Bloomberg's Jamie Nimmo walking us through, again, a historic first, a $1 trillion pay package for Elon Musk. We thank you so much. Let's head over to Washington, where President Trump met with 5 Central Asian countries to seek rare earth deals.
One of the key items on our agenda is critical minerals. In recent weeks, my administration has strengthened American economic security by forging agreements with allies and friends across the world to broaden our critical mineral supply chain.
Join us now from our Washington Bureau's Bloomberg's John Harney. John, good morning. Just walk us through what we learned here. We know the president has been on a deal hunt for these rare earths. Is it enough? Has he gotten enough supply?
No, be very brief about it. I mean, this is an ongoing problem, and it has echoes, curiously enough, with the Great Game, the confrontation between the British and Russian empires of the 19th century that centered on Central Asia. China has agreed to lift its restrictions on rare earth shipments, but I think the various companies, government agencies, other governments can't fully trust that, so they must look elsewhere. And President Trump has made forays to these countries in Central Asia, which were part of the Soviet orbit and under Russian influence since Tsarist times, really, and still have close ties to Russia, but they're eager for new contacts with the West, with the United States, given the sanctions that have imposed on Russia because of the Ukraine war. And China, of course, is also very interested in this part of the world.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. Let's go from the deal making on the geopolitical front to the deal making in the corporate sphere. The president also announced yesterday deals with 2 pharma giants. Take a listen.
Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have agreed to provide all of their other medications to Medicaid at most favored nations prices. Most favored nations, meaning that you will pay the lowest price anywhere in the world. That's what you're going to pay. Whereas before they paid low prices and we paid, thousands of percentile ahead.
I mean, John, this is a really interesting dynamic. You're now seeing something that Joe Biden had actively pushed for in his administration kind of being executed here by Donald Trump, and not even on regular drugs, on weight loss drugs. Just walk us through your take on this.
Well, there's several elements to this. President Trump campaigned against drug prices, against the pharmaceutical establishment, and he installed Robert Kennedy, a longtime critic of the medical drug industrial complex, if you will, as in his cabinet, in his administration. Now he seems to be making accommodations with these companies, or they're doing it with him, and it's all playing out with the whole tariff and with tariffs and other issues. Now, this, of course, does happen. This unfolded the week that Republicans received some bad news at the polls in the elections, and those elections showed that voters are concerned about prices, and that includes drug prices.
John, very quickly, let's go on to what's going on with the government shutdown. Hitting new roadblocks here. What are we seeing?
Well, back to the elections on Tuesday. It seemed earlier this week, and even late last week, that there was some sort of agreement in the works where certain so-called moderate Democratic senators would agree to, with Republicans, to reopen the government with some somewhat vague promises of action on healthcare subsidies that led to this clash, this standoff. But that now seems to be fading. That hope that seems to be fading. Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday that he was, and Democratic senators said they were less optimistic. And at the same time, President Trump said openly that this has hurt Republicans, despite Mike Johnson and other congressional leaders saying, or the Democrats since this began. We're now I think day 39 of this.
That sounds about right. Bloomberg, John Harney in Washington, giving us a roundup with some of the top stories, of course, there. We thank you so much. I want to continue on the theme of the government shutdown because one of the consequences is major disruption when it comes to air travel. About 700 Friday flights already canceled by the 4 largest airlines stateside. Joining us now from Newark Airport is our very own Nora Melinda. Nora, just walk us through what you're hearing, what you're seeing on the ground.
Well, Courtney, we've been here for about an hour at EWR Airport, and we've been talking to different people. We've really been seeing droves of individuals coming here, but in talking to some representatives at United, which of course we know to be one of the major hubs here in Newark Airport, they're really saying that this is not uncommon, the amount of people that are here today, but of course what still remains on the mind of a lot of travelers right now in this moment is flight disruptions. This is something that of course we've been grappling with the ongoing government shutdown. We've got TSA workers, air traffic controllers not being paid here since October 1st, so this is really in focus right now with a lot of travelers really just anticipating major delays here.
I mean, not helpful at all going to Thanksgiving or ultimately Christmas if this goes on. Nora, just connect what's going on the ground to a business audience for us.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about the fact that this has cost the U.S. economy $15 billion each week that we've seen this government shutdown prolonging, and of course, as you're mentioning here, we're headed right into the holiday season, which of course we know is a busy time for travelers. We even had Vice President J.D. Vance talking to a lot of airline executives discussing the fact that if this continues to prolong, it of course could bleed into the holiday season, and that's not good for, of course, the economy, travel, Americans more broadly here. So this still is a fear that a lot of people are grappling with. As we're really trying to see a resolution here and some sort of solution here for this government shutdown.
All right, Bloomberg's Nora Melinda at the Newark International Airport, giving us a lay of the land as we start to see more of these cancellations pile up. Thank you so much for your reporting bright and early for us in New Jersey. Coming up on the program, we're going to get you set up for your trading day with more earnings, and of course, humor sentiment data on deck. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Brief. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. Let's take a look at what's going up ahead today. We've got plenty of earnings. They are not over despite it being a Friday. Constellation Energy, KKR, and Wendy's reporting before the opening bell. Let's right back to the data front. The humor sentiment survey coming up at about 10 a.m. Eastern time. Is that going to give you the same trends, the same panic that you saw when it comes to perhaps the Challenger data we got earlier this week? And of course, Monster Beverage reporting after the market close as promised. Just because Friday does not mean the earnings are over. In the meantime, we'll take a look at some of the micro movers that are already seeing plenty of action this morning. I'll start with Expedia raising their full year outlook, citing some resilient travel demand. Different story from what we heard from IAG on this side of the Atlantic. Nevertheless, shares higher by almost 17%. Also some good news from a firm. Improved 2026 guidance, beating their estimates. Our interview with CEO Max Lupchin coming up on Bloomberg Technology at about 11 a.m. Eastern time. And lastly, one stock that's not doing so good in the pre-market. Open Door Technologies, the online home buying platform, posting wider than expected sales losses and really getting punished for it. Those shares down about almost 23%, trading about $5.09 a share. Let's zoom out for a little bit and talk about the macro story because S&P futures, really you're seeing plenty of volatility on a micro basis. You're not seeing it on a macro one. S&P futures virtually unchanged, 67.45 on the S&P E-minis. Same story for the Bloomberg dollar. You did start to see some Bloomberg dollar strength earlier in the session. Some of them might be getting their cue from a 10-year yield that's higher by 2 basis points. When you look at what's happening on this side of the Atlantic, I still think it's pretty interesting because a stock 600 picture is very different from what you're seeing over in the States. Down by 0.5%. A lot of those losses coming out of the healthcare stakes. One eye firm, Novo Nordisk, and their fight with Pfizer over Metsera. That seems to be bleeding into the broader healthcare space despite that drug deal between the getting prices lower in Washington yesterday. NYMEX crude at $60 and cable down about 0.2%, 131 on that transatlantic currency pair. Lots going on in the macro space, lots of earnings, lots of geopolitics to watch. It feels like a quiet Friday, but then you look at some of these earnings numbers and it doesn't quite feel like it's all over. That does it for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance is ahead with lots of fantastic conversations. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
John, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Julie.
So I was doing the math. I think that your year-end target of 70-50 would imply between a 3 and 4% rally pretty much from these levels. What do you think is going to get us there? I mean, obviously we've seen consistent rallies throughout this year, but what's sort of the next catalyst to push us to that level?
You know, Julie, I'm looking at the screen and you have our year-end 26 target, which I think is so much more important because we only have about 7 or 8 weeks left in this calendar year, and obviously a little bit of noise can move things. But if we look towards the next, let's say 14 months as opposed to the next 6 or 8 weeks, it's going to be earnings. The earnings have been incredibly powerful. The market is expecting another double-digit year, about 13 or 14% earnings growth. And even if those numbers come in lighter than that, you still should be able to deliver really healthy returns.
And, it's been a little bit confounded, right? In the face of all of this sort of macro stuff and noise that we've been talking about, whether it be the shutdown or the tariffs or, whatever has been thrown at this market, you look through that and you look at these earnings, and as you say, they've held up well. What is going on? Is that basically that this is all the tech and AI trade and that the earnings strength, a lot of it's coming from there?
I think, Julie, there's 2 ways of looking at this. If we look at it in terms of earnings growth, then you have a situation where tech companies are growing somewhere year over year, something like 27, 28%. You have like a 23 or 4% growth rate in financials. A lot of that is driven by some boost in M&A activity and deal activity, and that's really strong. And that represents about half of the S&P overall. But then if you look at the rest of the market, traditional cyclical groups like industrials and discretionary and energy and staples, they're delivering roughly 2 to 4% growth. So you have part of the market that's growing mid-20s, and the other half of the market is growing at a really weak, low single digits. But if you look at the health of earnings season, the way that we measure, and if you think about institutional clients and the way that they would look at it, did companies beat expectations, for companies this quarter? And companies are beating by 9%. Now, it's typical that companies beat lowered estimates and they beat by 4% or 5%, but a 9% earnings surprise is an insanely strong number, and revenues, the top line, is beating by 2%. And typically, that's much lower. So this is really healthy from a surprise perspective across basically every single sector, but the growth rates are really bifurcated.
So, and do you worry at all, because it sounds like you think that the growth part of it has fundamental underpinnings, do you worry at all about this whole debate about speculation in this market and whether things have gotten a little bit too far in terms of valuations in some areas of the market?
I think that there's a mistake that investors make, that when the market goes up, they naturally assume that things are more expensive. If you look over the year to date and you look at the broad suite of tech companies, they're up something in the ballpark of 26 or 27%. About 22% of that is earnings. So the amount that's coming from an increase in valuations is really small. And so I really think that we're not calibrating. The reason the overall market looks expensive is because the portion of the market in tech and high PE stocks is going up, not because the PEs of individual companies is getting higher. It's a mixed issue where the market is becoming more growthy, more tech-oriented, and therefore it has a higher PE, but not that the individual companies are problematic. If you look at these tech companies, and I'm talking about the larger names, the NVIDIAs and the Oracles and the whole basket of large cap tech companies, for the most part, their PE multiples are lower today than they were 2 years ago. And that is not the way that it's being portrayed in the media or in the general conversation.
So if you are looking at this bifurcated market, do you want to buy the whole S&P 500, or do you really want to overweight the groups that are doing better on an earnings basis?
I'm laughing at your question because when you're buying the market, you're kind
You
of
are overweight. Okay.
tech
But like, do you
basket.
just buy the tech, for example?
It's a really good argument. If you said I'm going to buy, let's say, a growth index fund or a growth mutual fund or what have you 15 years ago compared to buying the broad S&P, you would have done dramatically better. And if you look at, if you think about the idea of American exceptionalism, it's not everywhere. It really is in the tech suite, maybe some areas in healthcare, biotech. But if you look at the non-tech portion of the S&P and then you compare it to the rest of the world, it kind of looks relatively similar. And then you have this 40% or 50% of the market that is just delivering. It's not that the price of the stocks going up. The companies are doing something really special. It's showing up in the revenues. It's showing up in the earnings. And that's the story. It's not speculation. And I think it's going to continue. I don't see any reason why in the next 3 to 12 months that's going to turn. And if you look at the numbers, the way they're coming in and who's beating estimates and how the market's responding, there's just every signal is that this is going to continue.
So, John, really quickly then, if you don't see any reason why it's not going to continue, is there anything that could slow it down? What would be the roadblock? If you had to pick a risk, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, there's always lots of things. I mean, if we had, and we'll see what happens with the tariff discussion in the Supreme Court. But economists broadly expected these tariff issues to have a big impact on the economy, and it's had virtually no impact. Not virtually, but very, very little. And it's possible that it is having an impact. It just takes an extra several quarters for it to play through. So you could have the economy turn weaker. I don't think that if it's a little bit weaker, that's going to affect how we implement AI across our entire economy and society. But if you did see the unemployment rate start to pick up, companies would change their spending behavior. And I think you covered in your last segment, the employment situation is pretty tepid. It's really strange. We have a pretty good economy if you measure it the way that we do if we're looking at markets. And then if you look at jobs are weaker. It's possible that we could have negative job growth once the government opens up and starts reporting these numbers again. And that could cause corporations to cut back on spending. Do I think that those are going to happen? No. Do I think it's a real risk? Absolutely. And we're tracking it.
Well, quick check on stock futures. We're a bit mixed at this point, pretty much trading flat. The Dow indicating a higher open, up just around 60 points. And the moves come as this week's tech sell-off has many wondering whether overvaluation concerns have finally hit a boiling point, and if we're now seeing the end of a bull market that's been chugging higher since April. For a deeper dive, let's bring in Carol Schleif, BMO Private Wealth Chief Market Strategist. Carol, there's been a lot going on in the past few weeks. A lot of talk of a market bubble, whether we've hit the peak in the bull market. How concerned should investors be with this latest sell-off? Because a lot of strategists have also been telling us that a pullback was coming sooner than later.
Right. Well, a pullback would be normal, especially when you look at the energy that's been deployed coming off of those April lows. So some sort of a pullback in here would be natural. It's important, though, and the one thing that the markets have done very well all year is they might freak out a little bit in the short run, but they keep pulling back to what those fundamental threads, the underlying fundamentals are. And the underlying fundamentals remain pretty solid overarchingly. And we've seen that with tech company earnings, with other company earnings that were coming into the season so far, with something like 2/3 of the S&P having reported. We're talking double-digit bottom line earnings growth, which is pretty amazing for this far in the cycle. And so a pullback would be normal. The underlying fundamentals remain there. And actually, a pullback, I think, would be constructive in here because it allows markets to reset. They had kind of run ahead of things as markets are wont to do.
So you're saying underlying fundamentals remain strong. How much can that offset the concentration risks within this market? Because we've seen the S&P at 36 record highs, but just 6 stocks have driven half of those gains. So when you look at this pullback in relation to how concentrated this market is, does that indicate how much deeper the sell-off could potentially go?
Potentially, but you've also got, it's important to remember that those same companies are the ones driving the bulk of earnings and profitability. And you look at them in terms of, it's not like back in the late 90s. I know there's a lot of folks that want to conflate this with what happened in the late 90s, but it's a very different environment in terms of what's driven the earnings and driven the profitability are real companies generating real revenues out of real businesses. They're capacity constrained, which is part of why you've got the CapEx going on there. One of the things we are watching is how those are being funded because you're seeing some of the funding happening in the debt markets now as opposed to cash flow. So yes, that concentration is there, but up until the past few weeks, we were seeing broadening out. There are other companies, other sectors that play into the build there from in industrial manufacturing materials. There are a number of different industries too that are generating double-digit earnings growth.
Carol, does that worry you that these next 7 players are now funding a lot of their debt or tapping into the bond market to fund a lot of these endeavors?
Yeah, it's definitely something worth watching and it's worth unwinding because in my own head, we're trying to figure out, do you get so intertwined? And I think we're very early in that process because they had very strong balance sheets. They're trying to lever responsibly, if you will. They had almost underutilized balance sheets in a lot of cases. But the one thing we want to make sure is that we don't have a concentrated list of companies and funders that become so intertwined that they all become too big to fail. That's one of the things we're watching pretty carefully as well.
And given all the record highs that we've seen, sometimes folks tell us that, when you have some sort of pullback and you have a little bit of volatility, it's good for investors because you can get in at cheaper prices. So are you advocating to buy the dip at this point or would you wait on the sidelines a bit more?
I think it depends on client by client where they're at. We call it portfolio hygiene, and we've recommended continuing to rebalance through the year. It's also important to remember from a diversification standpoint globally that the U.S. markets, while they've done really well, have underperformed a lot of global markets. And so being globally diversified and continually rebalancing within that makes some sense. But for clients who have maybe year-end bonuses or early in the year bonuses, having a pullback in order to be able to deploy some of that cash makes sense. For other clients where they've got significant gains year to date and wanting to trim back and rebalance some of that into there, that makes some sense too. It's also great for those clients with appreciated securities to be able to do some year-end gifting to their favorite charities with those appreciated securities.
And finally, Carol, we have a K-shaped stock market, and it's coinciding with the K-shaped economy with those higher income consumers driving a lot of the resilience that we've seen within the economy. How concerned are you of the link between the stock market gains to that higher income consumer and how that could potentially bleed through to some of the economic growth that we've been enjoying over the past few quarters?
Yeah, I think that as well, the K-shaped consumer, the K-shaped companies in the economy is definitely worth watching because you do, as your earlier segments talked about with the consumer companies, you're definitely seeing strain on the lower part of that K and demographically as well. And so it bears watching because it impacts a lot of the consumer companies. And you've seen it in some of the earnings reports where you've got a lot of frontline consumer companies that understand how fraught consumers are with the higher level of prices they're paying now versus 5 or 6 years ago. And you touched on this, autos are expensive, homes are expensive, education, there's just a lot of things going in making it tough for that lower side. And they're staying supremely value conscious, but they're also making choices in terms of if they may not travel, as extensively, but they'll do staycations close to home. They may not spend up on certain things, but they'll divert someplace else. But the higher end consumer, as long as housing values and stock market, their spending tends to be much more tied to things like that as opposed to employment concerns or things like that. And even with a pullback in here, we suspect that when you look at overall net income and values that top tier owns, it's grown substantially in the last few years, not just in the US, but globally as well.
This week in tech has been pretty brutal. What do you make of the latest sell-off? Is this a healthy correction or maybe the sign of something a little bit more sinister?
Thanks. It's great to be here. We do see this primarily as a healthy correction. There certainly have been some areas of the market that have gotten extended, perhaps some valuations being more than could be supported by current growth estimates. So we see this as a healthy correction. We do think the market will find a bottom without spiraling downward here. But right now the market is under some pressure, and this will probably continue in the short term.
Are you encouraging clients to buy the dips at this point?
Well, I think it pays to be patient. It depends how exposed clients are. We do think clients should be exposed and have a healthy exposure to the AI themes, to technology that is going to be the growth driver of the future. We don't think that trend is going away. We still think it's in the early innings, and there's a lot more to go. But that said, over the course of days or weeks, you can get a lot of back and forth in the market. So I think it pays to be patient here, but also to look for opportunities.
So how do you play that then? If CapEx generation and really the returns and the ROI that we're going to see from AI is still years away, how do you stay invested in this space while not falling behind in other areas or pockets of the market that maybe are undervalued?
Yeah, well, one, we don't think it's years away. We think some areas are seeing earlier gains and some areas are probably going to take a bit longer. But we do think that those benefits of productivity is going to be real. It's going to benefit the economy, going to benefit companies, and going to benefit consumers and individuals as well. So I think as a starting point, it's important to look at which companies are actually starting to see the earlier gains, where are margins expanding. Nothing in the market is really cheap now. I think that's the challenge that we have. It's hard to point to a sector or an area and say this is a safe haven because there's so much disruption in the economy, so many shifts going on, changes happening very fast. And when you have a highly valued market and you have those changes taking place, there aren't necessarily areas to hide out. I think the reality is you still want to lean into the primary growth trends, and that is AI and technology.
And another theme this week that emerged is crypto. Bitcoin heading for a decline of 9% this week. Its worst week since March. And Inez, you've been following the crypto space very closely here. What's behind this drop, and what are strategists saying could come ahead?
Yeah, Ali, I just got off the phone with the head of 10X Research. This is a research firm that's based out in Singapore, and they made some pretty accurate calls over the last month, starting in the summertime, really. But basically, look, you've had these OGs, these long-term holders of Bitcoin that have been selling since the summertime, really, and you've seen sort of an acceleration of that selling over the last month or so. So that has weighed on the markets. You had the October 10th liquidation, which took out some very important technical levels. Some small investors were also liquidated there. And so what this firm is saying is that their base case is that the Bitcoin industry is now in a bear market, but they do not see this bear market lasting like the one in 21. I mean, technically, it isn't a bear market because it's off the 20% off its all-time high, which was reached about a month ago. But what they're saying is that if you break the 93,000 level, then you could see an air pocket and you could go further down. They're predicting perhaps into the 70s. At that point, also keep in mind that fund managers that have been buying ETFs, and they may also be forced to sell as well, because why would you hold a long position or a substantial position in these Bitcoin ETFs if it's falling? So there are some risks in the near term. What could turn things around? I mean, there are catalysts that could turn things around. The Fed could decide to cut in December. You could have more of a regime change at the Fed going into next year. You could see the government reopen. So there are catalysts that could turn things around. But right now, we are seeing quite a bit of pressure in the crypto market in general.
Michael Burry, the hedge fund manager of the Big Short fame, has two new targets, Nvidia and Palantir. Burry, who rose to fame for his 2008 bet against the U.S. housing market, bought put options on the companies. That was revealed in the 13F, and that means he would profit from price declines. The disclosure comes just a few days after he posted cryptic social posts about market exuberance. Joining us now for more on investing in tech is Max Wasserman, Miramar Capital co-founder and senior portfolio manager. Max, it's good to see you. The Burry stuff caught our eye because, he even in his Twitter profile, X profile, he calls himself a Cassandra, right? Warning of things to come. Do you think that this is a warning that investors need to heed?
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm surprised at the reaction. It didn't take much to say anything about valuations being this lofty. So if he throws a little cold water on it, it's probably short-term with the momentum trade right now. These valuations are ridiculous. I mean, Palantir is up, 170% year-to-date, trading roughly around 250 times. A great company, great technology, but these tech stocks are valued at growth in perpetuity, that there's never going to be a hiccup. So for somebody to come along and throw a little cold water on it, I'm surprised more people are not doing it, but there's no adage. You can go broke shorting in the momentous market, so I'm not so sure how long this lasts.
Although I guess with puts, you're not putting quite as much as risk as if you're outright shorting, Max. But so for normal investors who are looking at this question, what do they do about it? In other words, if you hold tech stocks, you just keep holding them. Is it just a question of not adding at these levels?
It's a great question. We have an investment in a lot of these large cap dividend tech stocks, and they've grown very large. So we are scaling them back a little bit for a variety of reasons. One being the valuations, and we just don't want to be so concentrated in the tech market because people forget back in March and April this year, the Nasdaq was down 20%. So the market could take this momentum and shift to the negative, and people could get really hurt. So we wouldn't be piling into these investments, and depending on your tax situation, we would lighten up a little bit here. We definitely would take a little profit. I mean, again, we're not saying get out of them, but you got to manage the downside risk. The valuations here at 40, 50, 200 times. How much more do you expect to happen? And is it asymmetrical? I think there's more downside than upside in the near term, but momentum is crazy right now.
Yeah, it does feel that way. And we've been talking to a lot of investors as well about diversification, and that means something a little bit different to everyone. And I think in your case, it means something a little bit different too. I'm curious about your strategy around sort of what you view as stocks that will benefit as interest rates come down more.
Sure. I mean, we diversify. We have individual dividend growth stocks. So we have the tech, which represents about 27% of our portfolio right now. And then we're diversified in healthcare, consumer staples, energy, cyclicals. So we think as interest rates come down, well, companies are going to benefit for that. Refinancing could help the housing market. Companies like Home Depot, which we have an investment. McDonald's, we think, as people have become more discriminatory in what they spend. But we like the defensive names. They're still growing, but not trading at these crazy multiples. We like healthcare, right? You're getting paid a nice dividend, 3 to 4% on average for some of these pharmaceuticals. And companies like AbbVie is a big investment for us. Waste Management's another good company. But we have a barbell strategy. We've seen this before. My partner and I have been around a while, from the white hair on my face, and we've seen when momentum changes. And when it changes, it gets ugly quickly. So we're telling people, have a little diversification outside these portfolios. Because what's happening now, the investor says, why should I own anything outside of tech? Because everything else is going down. Basically, everybody's selling everything that's non-tech and piling into the AI trade and second derivatives of the AI trade. So they're creating really great risk reward outside of AI, and it's become such a momentum trade in AI, it's very hard to make money at this level.
Max, what are your sort of contenders for a catalyst to end the momentum?
I think somebody wakes up one day, not today, but wake up one day. I'm not going to spend 250 times earnings on a company. I don't think 55 times earnings on some of these great companies. They're good companies, but the rate of growth is being valued at perpetuity. So any hiccup in that is going to send these stocks into correction. And we're not talking a 5% correction. When the Nasdaq pulls back, it can drop 20, 30% in a heartbeat. We saw that in 22 when the Nasdaq was down about 34%. People forget. You saw that this summer, going into summer, when the Nasdaq was down over 20%. So what we're saying is any rate of growth, any change in that. But I would tell you the thing that really concerns us. OpenAI is a great company. We love it. We have investments in tech, the Googles, the Broadcoms, we have it. But there's a lot of circular financing taking place. All these companies are giving money to OpenAI, which turns around and counts the revenue back that they're going to get from these other companies. And OpenAI
is valued so highly, and it's not really generating as much revenue as people think. So if there's any hiccup in OpenAI's financing, that could cause a domino effect. We don't think it will, but we're just saying there's a systemic risk out there that people are ignoring. And if there's a hiccup in financing in AI, Katie barred the doors because these stocks would drop like a heartbeat. So we're just saying identify risk, and for the individual investor, have exposure. But this is a good time to pare it back.
Right. Max, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
We are coming up on this mark. As you look back over the past year, what has been the biggest surprise to you as someone actively involved in these markets?
Good morning, Brian. Thank you for having me on. To me, it's the market resiliency. I mean, it truly is the Teflon market. Someone had told us a year ago that the Trump administration was actually going to go through with all of these reciprocal tariffs, with threatening 100+% tariffs on China, all of these different trade metrics, and the stock market, while volatile earlier this year, just kept sailing away and is at new highs and surging. I think all of us would have been a little bit skeptical, but yet again, this market has shown it is Teflon. Nothing can stick to it, and clearly the bulls are still in control.
Tom, is there more going? So to your point, look, it has been Teflon. We've had tariffs are still in place. We have an ongoing government shutdown. Why? Why is there something underneath the surface of this market besides AI that keeps investors just so optimistic?
So I think it's employment. Obviously, AI is integral to where the S&P 500 is, especially, and that is the linchpin. But as I look beyond the surface, it's employment, right? As long as people have jobs and can get jobs, then they can really weather a lot of uncertainty, inflation, things like that. And the fact that the labor market has stayed so strong, I think, is sort of the unsung hero of this market rally.
Now, Inez, I hear everything Tom is saying, but look, I mean, a large part of this rally is based on AI optimism. Every time OpenAI comes out with another deal, that company sees the potential to raise even more money at a higher valuation. The companies it works with, their stock has tended to trade up.
Yeah, this market is being led by AI mostly, and you have analysts that have been talking about the markets going higher because of AI. Yes, you've had the Fed easing, but AI is really the driver here. I will say that over this past year, just looking at this past year, the stunning rally from the April lows has been so notable, where the administration basically shifted to, we are going to spend our way out of this issue, and we are going to invest in all the sort of touch points of energy, of AI, of industrial. I mean, if you look at every single sector that is up right now year to date, it is what the administration has also been looking at. So the chip sector, data centers, electricity generation, all of this is what has been leading this market, and of course, AI being the fundamental theme throughout all of this.
Tom, let me get back to you. Why can't this continue into next year? If tariffs are going to take down the market, if the shutdown's not going to take down the market, if higher valuations are going to take down the market, we have the Fed out there likely to cut rates a couple more times next year. Right, what hits things here?
Yeah, so as we think about what goes wrong, I think that the simplest way to describe it, it's not that people were wrong to be worried about all these tariffs or policy uncertainty. It's that they expected it to be negative too soon. So the economy is still facing headwinds. The unemployment rate is rising. We are seeing economic metrics come in, but it's not reacting to tariffs and trade uncertainty as fast as everybody expected it to. But just because it doesn't do it as quickly, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And I think that, to me, as we look at 2026, I can start painting a case that the stock market is starting to make the economy look better than it really is, because AI is powering the S&P 500 higher, while the rest of these sectors, while not bad, we're starting to see little cracks. And I think that's a big thing to watch in 2026.
Let me bring in here. To Tom's point, there are cracks emerging in this economy. I look at what Chipotle said. Starbucks results are starting to improve, but still not blowing anyone's minds. We have the SNAP payments now missed. Now the retailers are reporting in a few weeks. I'm seeing cautious notes from Target in my box. I have a story on Yahoo Finance right now looking at Target stock trading at a 52-week low. So it's not all great out there economic-wise.
Brendan, I think a key indicator of really how this low and middle income consumer who has been struggling, as all those reports hinted to, will become clear when McDonald's reports this week their latest quarterly earnings. We're certainly keeping a lookout on that, the return to U.S. same-store sales growth, the momentum that they have behind these key value plays, and really leaning into the idea that they can hold and